Tēnā koutou, ngā mai haere mai. I'd just like to welcome everyone here today to the third meeting of the Natural Environment Committee. As we're running a hybrid meeting due to COVID alert level restrictions, this means there is no public gallery and therefore the meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the ECAN website. For those people who are joining us online, please use the chat function or speak to question, but we do not have any councillors online. I have been informed that there isn't a quorum present, and it's nice to see everybody here, and I'm pleased to declare the meeting open. I now invite Councillor Craig Pauling to open the meeting with a mihi whakatau.
O tēnei te ruru te koukou mai nei, ki hai mā whitiwhiti, ki hai mā rakarakatū, ko whanui o te ruru, te riko, he pō, he ao, kawatea, a ti hei moriori. A ki nā atua kaharawa, a ho mai o kaha ho mai o arawa kia mātou i tēnei wa. Ai nā wā kato. A ka huri au taka whakaro ki nā tini aitua, kua wehe atu ki te pō, haere, haere atura. O rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou, tonga ora. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou kei raro i te tūnui o tēnei whare o tātou. Nau mai ki tēnei hui tuatoru o te Commitee taio. Ai, nau mai, hara mai. Kia Genevieve, kei ko rā, i te whare. Nau mai, tauti mai, hoki mai, ki te kōrero o tō kaupapa, hei whakahaumaru o ngā upoko hui, tēnā koe. Ai, ki ngā ringa raupā, ngā kai kaunihera, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, he karakia timatanga o tātou nei hui. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tēnā a tātou i a tātou katoa, ki hei mauriona.
Kia ora, Craig. Thank you. Just before we get into the meeting, I'd like to note that we're going to have a change of order in the reports. I'm changing the order of report items 6.6 and 6.7 by bringing 6.7, which regarding the Central Biosecurity Advisory Group, in front of 6.6. That's to enable the appropriate persons to be present in the room. Move on to apologies. We have received apologies from Councillor Tane Apanui and apologies from Megan, Councillor Hands. Are there any conflicts of interest any members have to declare for today's agenda items? There being none, we will move along to item 4, public forum deputations and petitions. We have no request for a public forum or petitions have been received, but we do have one deputation and staff have just popped out. We have Genevieve Robinson presenting a deputation this morning. So can we please just mask up as our visitor comes in. Goodness me. We are pleased to welcome you, Genevieve. In regard to the item 6.2, our submission to the Fisheries New Zealand regarding further measures to protect Hectares dolphins, with regard to the additional measures that Council can expect from Fisheries, being the Regional Council governing out to 12 nautical miles. So, Genevieve, staff, I believe, have informed you of the process around here. We've got 10 minutes to speak, and there'll be a tap or a bell or something at 9 minutes. And then at the conclusion of that, you may be asked some questions of clarification. So, the floor is yours.
Just making sure everyone can hear me with this on. Can they? Okay, I might shift it a wee bit. So I thought it was timely to come today because we're 4 days out from the deadline for fisheries submissions on South Island Hectares dolphin protections with Fisheries. I just want to also add that it's a fisheries document. It's not Department of Conservation. It's no others implementing this particular document. So it is actually quite biased towards fisheries. And I just wanted to add that. Okay, so this is the options for Banks Peninsula and what these options mean for our Hectares dolphins. So I hope you've got the fisheries documentation in front of you because you need to refer to it a couple of times. So option 1 for fisheries is the status quo. And to be honest, that is quite ridiculous, adding something which gives you nothing. This option is not acceptable for many reasons. Hectares are still dying in fishing nets in our region, with 13 fishing-related mortalities since 2017 minimum. That's reported statistics. Set netting, as it is still allowed for 8 months of the year in Akaroa Harbour, from the wharf inland towards Devotional. That is unacceptable. Set netting also remains in all harbours and estuaries in our region. That won't change under these options. There are no trawl limitations around Banks Peninsula, with trawlers able to fish within 2 nautical miles of the coastline. There have been no additional protections to the coastline to both the south and the north of Banks Peninsula, which are aptly named by many, including some of the cruise operators in the area, as death zones. Option 2, bycatch reduction plan, which is the fisheries preferred option. This focuses on reducing bycatch by means of self-regulation and self-reporting. Under this option, a bycatch reduction plan is proposed for a fishing regulated mortality limit, which is an FRML, for each of the 5 local populations from right down south into Waiwai up to the north near Kaikoura. Fisheries risk assessments model allows for up to 46 dolphin mortalities from fisheries along the east coast annually, with 18 acceptable for Banks Peninsula alone. This total is based on aerial survey methods which are not peer-reviewed nor published in any scientific journal. Self-regulated fishing mortalities could in fact increase the Hectares fishing-related mortalities if we go ahead with this option. It also includes voluntary codes of practice implemented by fisheries. Option 3, trawl gear restrictions. They are not proven to be effective. The use of trawl gears in the areas of Pegasus Bay to South Canterbury Bight towards Timaru is prohibited unless a commercial fisher is using a low headline height for their trawl net or a low tow speed or both. Bear in mind, they're allowed to do this now, and these options are not even proven to be effective. There is no scientific evidence showing that by changing the headline height or trawl speed reduces or prevents dolphin bycatch. Table 2 in the documentation that you should have in front of you uses just 7 examples of trawl captures where information on headline height, tow speed, and vessel power are available. Please note, 7 examples are given over an entire time period of 24 years. These examples are anecdotal. They're observational information, not research. Therefore, should not be relied upon even. Fisheries accepts that research is light with regards to dolphin interactions with trawl vessels, and in particular, using the so-called dolphin bycatch prevention measures of the limited heights and vessel speed. And then we move to option 4, set net closure. This option considers extending the current range in places, though once again, it doesn't go far enough. It does not include harbours. See figure 6, page 17 of the documentation. The map highlights the proposed set net closures. Set netting in Akawara Harbour will remain, allowing for a staggering 8 months of the year. So what we know from these options is, based on 37-year research of the New Zealand Whale and Dolphin Trust, approximately 2,000 hectares live in our region, and less than 10,000 in total, sitting at less than 30% original biomass. The MPI estimate, however, of more than 9,000 hectares on the east coast of the South Island is not credible and has not been published as well in a scientific journal, or has it been peer reviewed. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, has recommended since 2012 protecting Hectares dolphins from both set net and trawl fisheries and all their habitat from the shoreline to the 100-metre depth contour is the only way to prevent this bycatch. Hectares dolphins are now on the red list of endangered species, along with the Maui and vaquita. So in summary, it looks as though dealing with trawling-related deaths is still on the too hard basket for fisheries, most likely because it brings in a lot of money than that of gill netting. However, both fishing methods kill dolphins around the world, with Hectares no exception. The big difference here, though, is that New Zealand has its very own dolphin species and very few of them. Bottlenose and common dolphins can be found in most oceans and seas around the world, with Hectares sitting in at 30% its original population size. We need to do everything we can to save them. It's also interesting to see that Fisheries includes an option 1 an absolutely do nothing option, yet fails to include one that follows the advice of the IUCN and IWC, and that is to do everything. So that's where this council has an option to decide exactly what happens to this region, following the expert advice of the IUCN, the IWC, the New Zealand Whale and Dolphin Trust, and many, many others, including myself, though I'm not an expert. Here we have option 5, which is a bit of everything. So the title of that is Do Everything in Our Power. So as a regional council, your voice for the Dolphins of Canterbury could mean the difference between more than 18 reported dolphin deaths each year, or even more, or a significant reduction in dolphin mortality. To protect, we need to create an alternative option and an alternative approach, accepting that every population of Hectares is unique and therefore important. From the river dolphins near Riverton, to the jumping and surfing dolphins of Curio Bay, the catlins, to the dolphins of the harbours and bays of Banks Peninsula, we need to protect them all. However, we cannot allow this region to absorb additional fatalities to reduce mortalities of other populations. It simply doesn't work like that. We need to remove set nets from all areas in our region. We need to push trawl fisheries out to 12 nautical miles, which is in the Regional Council's jurisdiction. To not allow the anecdotal research of trawler head height and tow speed to dictate areas where we can and cannot apply additional protections. We need to remove fishing close to shore within the 4 nautical mile limit immediately with no exceptions. Set net and trawl fisheries must be progressively pushed out to the 12 nautical mile, 100-metre zone, and we must follow international advice. As a nation, we must protect both Maui and Hectares out to the 100-metre depth contour, as recommended by the IUCN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Genevieve, for a very passionate deputation. Now, I'd just like to ask our councillors, is there any points of clarification? Councillor Farm and then Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, kia ora, Genevieve. Thanks so much for your work in this space and for being such a strong advocate for the dolphins. I I just had some questions of clarification. Have you read our submission in the papers today? You haven't. Well, basically, we propose the trawling and set net bans out to the 12 nautical miles or 100 metres, as you say. But I wanted to ask specifically about removing fishing close to shore within 4 nautical miles, which you mentioned, with no exemptions. Do you mean commercial fishing? Do you mean all fishing everywhere? What is your intention here? Set nets. Yeah.
Vessels of this that.
Oh, sorry, put your button back on, actually.
Sorry. So as it stands, fishing vessels operating a vessel of under 46 metres, using that headline height tow speed thing, are allowed to come within 2 nautical miles of the coast. That's really dangerous habitat because, as we all know, I mean, black cat cruisers and all that, they go within that area, and we see dolphins. Yeah.
So, but if set nets and trawling were not allowed within 12 nautical miles, presumably that would cover that.
There is always going to be something.
Sorry, button back on.
Depends what option you're talking about, because as it stands, most vessels can't operate in that 2 nautical miles unless they've got the ability to reduce their tow speed in that. And it's a worry that Fisheries still could implement that as an option. If you're banning set nets and trawl fishing with no exemptions, that's great if you can.
Yeah. Well, we can put in our submission, is what I'm saying, because this is what we're talking about today.
Have you included harbours?
No. So that was my other question, because I think we support the area of the set net ban in the document. But I'm taking from what you're saying, it's insufficient. So you'd like specific mention to harbours, and you mentioned south and north of Banks Peninsula.
Yeah, there's the map indicates some gaps. So it needs to just follow a clear line rather than not there, not there. I mean, dolphins can't differentiate between areas, and the death zones are called that because they go in and out them, and it puts more emphasis on those areas for further fisheries. So if they can't go somewhere, they go somewhere else, and that's what's happening. There's 4 Hectares dolphin deaths in the past week, and they're calves, and we're still waiting for, working out what's happened, albeit not in Banks Peninsula, but it's enough to warrant what's going on.
Mackenzie.
Thanks for your dedication, Genevieve. I just wanted to know, what's your view of recreational fishing? Just fishing from fishing lines, customary fishing, those sorts of things in this area.
I think there's always going to be dolphin safe methods. I'm sorry. Customary fishing, good, as long as the right equipment is used. But I don't believe in set nets at all. Sorry, because they can be left unattended and they're of the wrong filament and material to be safe to dolphins. I don't. There's no exemptions. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Are there any more questions of clarity, Genevieve?
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation, and taking your time to come in. We really appreciate it. Do you happen to know how many trawlers there are that are under 45 metres that can go that slow, that are regularly fishing in those gaps?
I don't know exactly that data, no, but I could find out. There is documentation I've provided as well, which is by Liz Sluton and Steve Dawson, that shows trawling-related mortalities. It's quite a sizable document that was written on behalf of the IWC. And it's got some graphs in there and tables that show, yeah, I'd be able to get that information. But it's, yeah, there's fleet sizes, and then you have to work out the size of the vessel and then work from there. But, you know, with a timely situation like this, with 4 days to go, I may not be able to provide that information.
And is there any work done around the economic income just from this area around here? Do you know? Have you seen any papers looking at that from trawl fishing and set netting in that area from the commercial fishery?
There will be. Once again, I'd have to get that. There is definitely an open document available on the marketing of tourism-related incomes, which actually goes well and beyond fisheries. But probably in the days right now of COVID, it won't be the same. But once we get back to normal operational tourism, that actually goes well and beyond for this area.
We have a question from Councillor Pauline.
Kia Genevieve, tēnā koe mo tō kōrero I tēnei ata I te kaupapa o te whakahaumaru o ngā ūpoko hue, tēnā koe. I just had a question about the recorded deaths. Is there a link or is there any place that's actually recorded and who records them?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So there is documentation and quarterly updates to that, and it's run by the Department of Conservation. I'm happy to provide that with you. So yeah, it's called Hectares in Maui Incident Database, and it goes back to historic numbers, you know, in the 80s and 70s, and that it's just been updated again, I believe. But the problem we've had is that they've been caught out twice by not updating their database for various reasons. Some of them very questionable, and that included the Maui dolphin of February. They sat on it for 4 months without releasing data. So it is pretty accurate. Bear in mind, probably 1 or 2 may be missing occasionally. But yes, it's very easily found. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Councillor Southworth.
Thank you. Thanks, Genevieve. I was you asked about harbours explicitly, and I had it in my ignorance. I think I assumed that if we said, you know, out to 4 or out to 12, that would include the harbours. But it doesn't. Okay, because I can see we haven't got harbours.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, no, you're right. It's always been exempt, and it's currently exempt, and that remains like there's no option within that documentation that talks about harbours. And I would probably stress, considering there's 42 bays in Banks Peninsula, it would be very good to actually include those estuaries, bays and tidal areas, which we know they swim in.
Okay, sorry, you've got one, Councillor Scott? No. Okay, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you, Genevieve, very much for taking the time and the interest to come and certainly present your deputation to us. Just before you go, we do have just a recommendation that the Natural Environment Committee receives your deputation or receive the deputation from Genevieve Robinson regarding item 6.2, submission to Fisheries New Zealand regarding further measures to protect the dolphins. You'll have a mover for that. Okay. And seconder, Lan, Councillor Farm, thank you. So we've got a mover, Chair Jenny, and a seconder, Councillor Farm. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? None. The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The paper's out that your submission. Is that available to look at now? So it's already been done.
Yeah, I'll come and give you my copy.
Okay, sorry. I just was under the assumption that I was.
It can be amended.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You're welcome, Genevieve, to stay next door until we get on to that bit, which won't be that long, if you'd like to. Right, we can unmask. Right, we'll now move on to the minutes. we have the minutes of the previous meeting are on page 7 of your agenda. Are there any matters of accuracy regarding the minutes of the Natural Environment Committee for the 23rd of September 2021? If there are no matters of accuracy, can I have somebody that will move that we confirm the minutes from the Natural Environment Committee meeting held on the 23rd of September 2021? Thank you, Nicole. Nicole Marshall. And do I have a seconder for that?
Yeah.
Councillor Pauling. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the minutes of the confirmed sub-catchment committee meeting that were held. They're on your page 18. They're held on the 7th of October. We have a recommendation there that the committee receives the minutes from the Catchment Subcommittee meeting held on the 7th of October 2021. Do we have a mover and a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Tumitame Cranwell. And a seconder. Thank you, Mr. Clearwater.
You don't want
Can we have a seconder and then we can.
Yeah.
Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. It's hard to actually sit here and look and. Right here. Before we vote on that, Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you. I'd just like to refer to page 21 and 7.1. I'm aware that these minutes have been confirmed by the committee itself. That's fine. I already make this point just for the future note, and that is that the line which says the subcommittee noted the majority of members preferred a particular option cannot actually be a fact. It's like a matter of someone's opinion or the committee's opinion. So I just want that, I want to note that myself, just so that in fact in future, if there is to be something like a majority, that a vote would be taken or that kind of thing. So that's really all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Councillor Clearwater. As you've rightly noted, the minutes are confirmed, have been confirmed by that subcommittee. So really, we cannot change them, and take on board your comment. Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to. Oh, sorry, we've got. Yes, thank you for the prompts. We'll now move. Councillor Scott, would you like to make it? Yeah. Just can we move the minutes as in the agenda before we go on to any matters, so that the committee is receiving the minutes from the Catchment Subcommittee meeting held the 7th of October. We've got a mover, Tumitame Cranwell, and a seconder, Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. With regard to matters arising, there are a couple of recommendations in there that we are dealing with in our report item 6.1. So just like councillors to be aware that those particular recommendations that were to come up to the Natural Environment Committee are going to be discussed in 6.1. Councillor Scott, do you still have a comment to make?
Just a matter of process. We had Recreational submission, and we've received that deputation from Horticulture. And I was just wondering that we've received it. Have we communicated with Road Metals since in terms of closing off that loop?
Apparently he has been acknowledged and thanked for attending. Unless somebody else can provide some information, I'm looking at staff in this situation with some guidance with respect to that. Catherine?
Just that there is some gravel meetings coming up in December, which he will be a member and attending those meetings. So a lot of those concerns will be raised through that avenue.
Thank you very much. Right. So we'll now move on to the report items. So that's page 30 of your agenda. I'll just get there myself. So this is the financial delegation to support the flood recovery report. So these are this particular item is as a result of the recommendations that have come out of the Subcatchment Committee. The two recommendations that were in the minutes, and then I will pass on to Catherine. You're going to talk to this if you'd like to come to the table. Thank you. Take the report as read, but if you might like to just give a very quick outline, and then any questions of clarification can be asked. Thank you, Catherine.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And this is really just to ask for financial delegation for expenditure over the approved budget due to the unexpected event in May and June of this year. Noted that Council has already been asked for 4.1 million towards this event, and this is the which was our initial thoughts that we would potentially breach our threshold for NEMA funding. This is really an additional amount to take up to 8.2 million for this year to enable us to complete that work in this year.
Thank you. Does anybody have any points of clarification? Councillor Marshall?
Kia ora. I've got two questions. The first one is just seeking clarification that we don't anticipate any other funding requests this financial year.
So the estimated cost of the event to ECAN's assets is 19.7 million. That is what we expect at this time. Obviously, as works progress, that may change, maybe less. And the work will be completed not only this year, but also the next financial year. So we won't know that full 19.7 million, I guess, until next year.
And my second question is just regarding process. I know what said 0.5 that subcommittee has to elevate to this, that can then elevate to council. That's really inefficient, and I'm just wondering what is there scope for under the committee review that we can resolve inefficiencies so we're not triple handling things, please?
Yes, we can take that on board. Councillor Chair Huey?
Yes, that is something that's already envisaged in the review. Under the terms of reference of the committees, if you look towards the end of the terms of reference, you'll find that everything's delegated to the committee except 6 things. And I suspect this is one of them if Catherine's had a look at it. But we're going to consider that during the review, and Ian has already spoken to Catherine and people about that. So that's a good point, Nicole.
Councillor Mackenzie?
Look, if I may just add to Catherine's reply to Councillor Marshall's first question about funding. And I agree with everything. I mean, not just to add, not to contradict or anything, is that what you must understand is that the rivers, despite the money we've already spent on them, are in a highly vulnerable state. And so what the unknown factor and the costs to repair the rivers is what other damage might be done while they're in that vulnerable state, which could actually substantially change the cost to continuously repair if the damage we've already repaired gets blown up by a major flood event in the short term.
Thank you. Are there any more questions of clarification? Councillor Pauline?
Kia ora. So just in the delegation approval, I'm just asking a clarification thing. So who are we delegating? Are we delegating the subcommittee, or is it just a delegation for staff? So just can you, sorry, I just don't understand how it works.
As we're going up.
Yeah, I know, but then
We're recommending.
I'm just trying to understand how that works. Can someone tell me?
So according to the delegation's policy, if expenditure is not already in the annual plan or the long-term plan, then we must come to council to gain that financial delegation.
How does this relate to the proposed or potential other money we've been looking at through the annual plan for the coming year? How does that relate? Is it the same or is it additional?
So this is related to expenditure. So how it is funded is what you're going to be deciding through the annual plan process.
Okay, if there are no further questions of clarity, we will then, I will move that we put this motion on the table, that we recommend to council that an additional financial delegation approval is given for the unbudgeted May-June 2021 flood recovery expenditure of a further 4.1 million for the year ended June 30th of June 2022. And noting that the council has already approved 4.1 million for the immediate flood recovery work. And point 2, it notes the potential options for rating changes for the flood recovery are being explored by staff for inclusion in the draft 2022-23 annual plan. So there'll be an opportunity for discussion. I've moved it. So you'd like to second it? Yes. Right. We've got second Councillor Mackenzie. Right. Their discussion now. We'll open it for discussion. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor.
Yeah. While I'm happy to vote in favour of this, I am very worried about this big ongoing expenditure for a problem that is probably going to occur next year and the year after and in the future. I feel that it's a huge task and it's going to just get bigger. And I wonder also how much we're going to be spending on managing people's expectations, how much we're going to be spending on managed retreat, because our climate lease is up in many areas in New Zealand, and we actually need to think carefully about where we should actually be. So I'm in favour of making things safe in the interim, but we do need to be looking to the future for moving away from those areas that are high risk. And I'm talking about large scale managed retreat, actually moving towns, for example. So yeah, I will support this, but I'm just saying that we can't keep doing this every year. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I have same concerns. And obviously the 4.1 million is needed now because the work's been undertaken and it's some urgency in the recovery operation. But climate change is going to change things, well, it's already changing things fast. And this kind of expenditure, nearly $20 million, can't continue next year and the year after, etc. We will need to accelerate a strategic review of all operated rivers, look at land use activity within the river corridor, both from an agricultural perspective, productive perspective, and the way we place urban spaces as well. And that's just something that obviously council is going to have to discuss through its annual plan process, but also consider separately to that, given the urgency of the impacts of these events.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on that? Chair Huey.
Yes, I'd like to speak to this item. I think it's great work that the Catchment Subcommittee's been doing, and that's what we need to involve people in the discussions, particularly people on the ground who are affected by the braided rivers directly for their economic income. But it's really, really important that we are speaking to central government and all the other parties around the future of how we are going to fund the recovery of rivers, because the indications are that we are going to get more instances of predicting 1 in 200 year floods or 1 in 100 year floods. And it's obvious that this regional council and the local ratepayers can't go on paying for this. So we're going to have to obviously take this up, and I agree, there will need to be some sort of review, and this will be part of what we put into central government under our submission around how we're going to deal with these rivers in the future, both from an ecological point of view and from an economic point of view, but more from an ecological point of view, because we're going to have to continue to live with these rivers in a way that we can manage. And I just want it to be noted that we are involved in initiating a proposal across all the regions, particularly in the South Island, on putting that argument to central government, and we're hoping that's going to go well.
Councillor Southworth and then Councillor Scott.
Thank you. Yeah.
Councillor Mackenzie. Sorry, I punched yours. Button.
Yeah, so also support the recommendation and acknowledge the need to make the embankment safe now, of course. But this totally speaks to the conversations that were had in the development or the signing off of the 30-year infrastructure strategy that went with our long-term plan. We signalled at the time there was a real need for a change of thinking around how we manage our rivers, flood risk, and the multi-benefits that they bring in terms of biodiversity and so on and so forth, and that there is growing evidence and research and thinking around how to manage these things. And the infrastructure strategy makes it really clear when you look at the figures just how fast the costs of maintaining our current way of doing things going into the future. You start looking to 20 years out and 30 years out, and the costs just ramp up and up and up. So I think it's, you know, this is a real funding thing that's really showing us just what this amounts of funding these things need and why it's important to rethink how we do things.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd just like to just say what a great piece of work the co-chairs of the subcommittee have done in terms of engaging with the communities across this, right, not only during the Ashburn event where Councillor Mackenzie spent a amount of. This is business as usual. This is about recovering a position, which we need to do. That's our contract with those ratepayers, those targeted ratepayers who are paying for this protection. I've no doubt at all that we need to have a conversation reinforcing what Chair Huey has just said going forward. And it's unfair. This unfair how this is set up, and we're trying to do something about that. And the time when we do something about that, then we can have those conversations with not only those communities, but with mana whenua and others who have interest in our rivers, and get a new model. But we haven't got a new model. We've got this model, and I support this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'd just like to support Chair and Vice Chair, Chair Huey and Vice Chair Scott's comments, and remind this council that one of our core responsibilities as a council is to protect our citizens from floods. And we have been advised in the past, but I'll remind the council that there's $110 billion worth of assets protected by our river management control systems in Canterbury. And our investment in those river management systems comes to about $650 million, and we only spend $15 million a year in effectively protecting that $110 billion worth of assets. And would also point out that these floods seriously threatened Ashburton, Rangiora, Winchester, Geraldine, Temuka, Pleasant Point, Sheffield and Springfield. And there was houses flooded throughout the region as a result of these floods. 4,000 people in Ashburton were given a notification to evacuate at 2 o'clock in the morning because they were concerned that the stop bank at Jessop's Bend was going to breach. To talk about managed retreat or moving whole towns is something that I think as councillors, and you believe in that, you would need to campaign on and see how people will react to that. But I'd point out that most people in Christchurch feel safe because of the investment that this council and central government has made in the flood banks along the Waimakariri River. It would be a major call if this council changes its position in terms of its responsibilities in protecting our communities from flood risk.
Thank you. I think we'll take the last comment from Councillor Clearwater.
Yes, I'd like to thank the committee for, and I think all the community too, for some sterling work that's been done. I would make the note in relation to the delegation for funding that all the my reading of the committee's delegations is that council may already delegate the financial delegation for a specific matter. So I'm sure that can be attended to quite easily. In relation to how, in fact, we proceed, it is obviously incredibly complex, but I guess a stronger partnership with central government is going to be essential, especially if we're going to provide sufficient protection, and there's limits to that. But in terms of providing it, it seems to me that we have to argue for a form of the funding from central government include betterment. Otherwise, if we're putting in the same infrastructure, clearly with the increased, not just the frequency, but the intensity and quantity of rainfall, anything that goes in like for like is potentially doomed. So they're huge financial questions. But I think too, part of that equation actually long term is that the whole, in terms of protection, that the concept of retreat cannot be dismissed. It's something which we need to do for our coastal areas, and we need to do it for part of our rivers, so that in fact we make sure we're not only protecting people, but in fact that it is indeed affordable.
Thank you. So we've had quite a good discussion there. I just remind councillors that this recommendation does relate to the immediate flood recovery project that is underway at the moment, as a result of the damage that was done in the May-June 2021 floods. So we have a recommendation here, which is up above here on the screen, that the Natural Environment Committee recommend to Council that an additional financial delegation approval, well, you can read it, so I don't really need to read it all through again. We have a mover and a seconder. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? None being against, that motion is carried. Thank you very much for that. We'll now move on to a decision item here regarding the submission to the Fisheries New Zealand. Take that as read in your papers. We have the report writer online. I'm just trying to room in the room now. Sorry. So we've got Joe and Andrew at the table. Oh, and Jane's sitting in the chair in case she's called upon. Thank you, Jane. Change is slightly different to the order on the paper. So would you like to speak to these two pieces? I think we'll do them together, as in the agenda item there, 6.2.
Morena councillors, first up, I'd like to acknowledge the work that both Joe and Jane have done in terms of preparing the submission. Joe Mitten, I don't know if she's presented publicly in front, and I'd like to acknowledge her presence here today. Secondly, I'd like to highlight that there are two submissions today, both relating to fisheries measures. The first around additional measures to protect Hectares dolphins, and the second around the additional requirements for onboard cameras. As I understand it, Joe will give a short summary of the submission, and then we'll receive quick questions of clarification. It might be also useful if Joe speaks a little in terms of the points that were raised by Genevieve and where our submission aligns or doesn't align with them. Over to you, Joe.
So, kia ora koutou, no o te tahi toku whanau, no o te tahi aho, ko Joe Mitten toku ingoa. He kaimahi aho ki te kaunihira taia ki Waitaha. Ke te mahi aho ki planning. Kei te aku tono aho ki te kōrero Māori. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. So as Andrew said, we've got 2 submissions that we are putting forward to Fisheries New Zealand. The first is on protecting South Island Hectares dolphins. This comes from our we had a previous submission in 2019 around the National Hectares Dolphin Threat Management Plan. And as part of our submission, actually, we said that it needs to be looked into a bit further in terms of further fisheries measures. So I think they got that from a few people. So they've now putting out further consultation on these measures. So I'll just quickly run through a couple of areas that we have submitted on, and you can ask me any further questions. We, as part of the consultation, are proposing a bycatch reduction plan, which is what Genevieve spoke a little bit about. Currently in the document, they've got it as voluntary. And in our submission, we have suggested that it actually be regulated because they have a whole lot of different responses that then rely on that species management plan, protected species management plan that we want to regulate. And if it's not regulated, we're not sure how those responses will then occur. We also agree with new adaptations and mitigations and methods to come out in terms of technology and fishing methods and that kind of thing. So we're happy with that. We do, however, think that in regard to the fishing related mortality limits, that sort of each dolphin capture is unique, and that there needs to be a response that's specifically designed for each of those captures, that we shouldn't be waiting until we get to 35 dolphins that they've put for Canterbury as their fishing related mortality limit to then go further and then have some regulation applied. We think that it needs to be looked at on each single one. In terms of trawl gear restrictions, we've put in there that we'd like to see restrictions on trawling in areas that are natural and physical resource for Hectares dolphins, and also that we would like to see, in terms of set netting, that we'd like to see the set net closure out from Banks Peninsula be extended out to 12 nautical miles or 100 metres, which is also what Genevieve had suggested. So we've got that in there. If you want, we can add in there around harbours and estuaries to make sure that that's in there, but that's a discussion for you guys to have. Currently, the exemptions are in harbours and estuaries. Currently, the exemptions are for recreational fishers, which actually there's not many anyway, talking to harbour masters. And those restrictions run from the 3rd of January to the 30th of April. The fishers have to stay with their set nets and they can't be closer than 200 metres from shore. So that's what those exemptions are. I'll quickly run through, the final point is that we had that fishing related mortality limit of 35 for the whole Canterbury region. I think Genevieve said 18 this morning, but that was just for the Banks Peninsula area. There's actually 5 subpopulations in our Canterbury area. And so we said that we think that needs to be reduced. We're not that keen on having a target for fishing related mortality. We really want, one dolphin death is one too many. The second submission is on the wider rollout of onboard cameras. Fisheries New Zealand put this out because they've realised there needs to be greater assurance of sustainable fishing practices throughout New Zealand, and the increased monitoring and verification of this by the use of onboard cameras will hopefully lead to improved fisheries management and environmental outcomes as well. In terms of their proposed scope, they're proposing a few vessels, so all trawl vessels 32 metres or under. They're all set net vessels that are 8 metres or over in length, and all surface long line, bottom long line, Danish seine and purse seine vessels have onboard cameras. Our submission, we put that we'd actually like to see all commercial vessels have onboard cameras, that it doesn't need to be just for those that they've outlined. They've also put a proposed deployment of onboard cameras into their consultation document, so they're looking to prioritise when different areas have to get their onboard cameras. We think that they actually need to get them on as soon as possible, these cameras on as soon as possible, and that there's no real need for a deployment of them environmentally, because all ships and all vessels have to go into the harbour and dock at some point anyway, quite regularly, so there's no reason, we don't see why they can't go in and get them as soon as possible, because they were proposing to have this deployment process out to 2023 or 2024, and we just don't think it needs to take that long. We think with the number of vessels anyway, in some areas it's quite low, so just get them on there. And there was also something else in the consultation document about the level of industry contribution to the costs of having the onboard cameras. And it's not necessarily something we as ECAM want to get too involved in, but you know, on land, farmers have to cover the costs of their environmental protection generally. And so I think there was a comment from Councillor Mackenzie regarding that, in terms of actually they should probably cover some of the costs. And I think that's generally the key points of the submission. So if you have any questions, or I know there were some amendments this morning as well that you might want to run through.
So there are a few amendments of wording or changes of wording, but we'll go through them as amendments that have been indicated. Now, questions of clarity at this stage. We've got Chair Huey.
Yeah, I've got a question of clarity. I would have actually, anyway, on page 42 in our submission on the first one, question 6, under that 2.29, can you just clarify why we're actually saying, what we're actually saying there? Question 6, 2.29, para 2.2.1.
Okay, so this question,
I'll pop your button on.
this question is just a general question that was set out by Fisheries New Zealand in the consultation document, around do we agree with Fisheries New Zealand preferred options. So their preferred options were option 2 and option 4, which is the bycatch reduction plan and the set net extensions. And so a response there was that yes, we agree in principle with the preferred options. However, we would like to see them with the suggested amendments we have in the submission, and that we would also like to see some further trawling restrictions, which we also set out.
I have a follow-up question to that. Do you think, after listening to Genevieve this morning and the point she made and what we're suggesting, you haven't seen the amendments, I suppose, or you might have had time to look at them. Do you think that that's clear enough and strong enough to actually make the point generally about what we're saying once we add those in?
Yeah,
that'd be good. Cool. I'll pop your button on.
More than happy to add in a little bit more around there to make it tighter. Yep. That's just the point. Yep.
Okay, we'll wait and see what comes through from that. Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Southworth, Mackenzie, and then Liz Mackenzie.
Thank you. So, under 2.25, you referred, when you were just talking to us there, about the natural and physical resource or habitat for the Hectares dolphins and using that to inform where restrictions or might go. Do we understand well the natural and physical resources that our dolphins are using? Are those areas well defined through research and so on? Do we have that knowledge?
Yeah, we do have quite a bit of knowledge about it, and I have just been involved in a workshop a couple of weeks ago with the Department of Conservation around cruise ships entering into the harbour and the effects that they're having on dolphins. So I found out a little bit more information on them actually. So they generally are out to about 20 nautical miles is where they go, and they range about 30 to 50 kilometres longshore in their populations. So we are pretty clear about where they go. Yeah.
It's just a question of clarification about dolphin deaths, and I'm very comfortable with the submission. So I'm not questioning any of the direction. But I got a bit muddled between Genevieve. I think she said there were 18 deaths since 1998, so 20 odd years, and you're talking about a 35 death threshold. Has that got a time frame? Can you just explain?
Yeah, certainly. So the fishing related mortality limit is sort of the acceptable amount of dolphins in the Fisheries New Zealand eyes that can die in order before the population is affected. Yeah, so it's a 12-month rolling period that they're saying. So the 18 that I think Genevieve was referring to, in this document, they've got a table that sets out the fishing related mortality limits in terms of how many a year for Banks Peninsula for each of the local populations. So there's 5 of them. 18 was allowed around Banks Peninsula, but all along our jurisdiction, which is the entire Canterbury coastline, that equates to 35 dolphin catches a year in a rolling 12-month period, until, say, the minister is called in and they have to possibly shut it down. So we thought that 35 number was actually a bit too high.
So what is the actual number of deaths in a rolling 12-month period for the Canterbury region?
So we have some help here. We've got open the screen. So I've just Councillor Pauling.
So I had a look up the doc incident list that Genevieve mentioned, and since 2017, rough counting just right now, there's been over 35 deaths of Hectares dolphins in Canterbury. Actual reported
17.
deaths. 17. Yeah. Yeah, and you can read it all there. They tell you what it's about, why they died and stuff. So entanglements, one of the major ones.
So we're a long way below the fisheries 35 per year per 12-month number. But I accept that any death is a bad death. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Liz McKenzie.
Yeah, I've just got a question of clarification. In the deputation, Genevieve mentioned that areas 2 to 4 metres out from shore and harbours, bays and estuaries were not sort of covered. Have we covered these in our submission, or is that something that we need to? I mean, I sort of looked through and I couldn't sort of find anything. And do we need to discriminate between areas of 2 to 4 metres, or would that, if we said estuaries, harbours and bays, would that cover what she's talking about?
Yeah, I believe it would.
Mm-hmm.
Just sorry. Sorry.
And I'm out.
So I think it would, but I think it would be good to say if you wanted to make sure it was closer to shore than that you would just say for all estuaries, harbours, no matter what distance offshore.
Okay, any further questions of clarity before we open this into a discussion? If there is not, I'd like to thank staff for coming on to the table and speaking to that item. I would just draw people's attention to the recommendation that we do have here, and we are going to have to move it as on the paper, and I will move it. Do I have a seconder to move it so that we can then go into discussion with regarding to these submissions? Tumatoma Crown, thank you very much. So we'll now open this up for discussion. I am aware that there has been some amendments circulated. So I think I probably might go to Councillor Farm first, if I may.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm just sending additional. Yeah, kia ora, thank you. So I have a few amendments here. I've just, and this is in response to the discussion that we've just had in Genevieve's submission. So the first one is about just expressing how seriously we are treating this issue. We note in the introduction of our submission that the declining population of Hectares dolphins is a concern. It is a concern, but it's a serious concern. So I just propose that we put of immense concern to Environment Canterbury. The next one is really just picking up on being more specific about the areas in which we're proposing and wanting to see restrictions on trawling, set nets, and also gill netting. So this is really picking up on including all estuaries, harbours and bays, no matter distance offshore. Now, in my amendments, I'm proposing that to be said in 3 places, basically where it relates to trawling, set netting and then gill netting. If that's a bit clunky, I just want to flag, obviously, in our staff and amendments, if they want to make that more specific or in a better way, then that's cool. I'm just spelling it out here. And I wanted to specifically on the trawling point, the 2.25, just say instead of over identified areas, over areas that are of natural and physical resource or habitat for Hectares dolphins. And that's really the intention to have that more contiguous area and not be picking up these kind of patchy areas where there's more evidence and less evidence of presence or absence of the dolphins. It's about one extended habitat, and we want to make that really clear. So that's the intention there. Do you want me to read them out, or they're up there? Sorry, the ones actually up there don't include, which I've just emailed. It now says including all estuaries, harbours and bays, no matter distance offshore, which was just discussed.
I just wonder if I could suggest that we perhaps get all the amendments up and have them as some discussion around them in their entirety, because I think it probably makes a little bit more sense. So I know that Tumatara Couch Lewis, you have a proposed amendment. Would you like to just put that onto the table?
With the chair's permission, to clarify with Lance, to say no matter distance offshore, then out to 12 nautical miles, contradictory. So I'm just wanting to clarify that.
No, it's that. So what the concern is, Nicole, is that there are exemptions. So if you say out to 12 nautical miles, there's actually exemptions within that. So the no matter distance offshore applies to the estuaries, harbours and bays. So it's not contradictory. It's about picking up what's inshore is the intention. And I think that's where there's real areas of confusion.
Are you, sorry, that's all right. Are you, would you like to speak now?
On the covering leashes, on the covering letters, I am recommending in paragraph 2, where it talks in terms of Papatipu Runaka, and in terms of a Tonga species, that we actually do have a name, a Māori name for our dolphins, and it's in the Tonga species list, and I would like to have that name placed on there. I have thought about it going through the document, however, there are a number of names that are given to Maui and dolphins. I think that it would be quite safe to use it where you refer to Tonga species. It's a Ngāi Tahu word, and especially in relation to Papatipu Runaka. We call our little Hectares in Littleton Harbour in Whakadaupō Ōpoku Huia and Hui, and that is what I would like to have put on there. UPOKOHUE, and there is no macron. Kia ora.
And we have one from Councillor Pauling.
Kia ora koutou. It's just in relation to 2.3 on page 42. 2.30 on page 43, which currently is sort of in addition to our thinking there about the trawling issues. But it talks about a no-take marine reserve being a better idea. And I just think that we need to have a think about that because, you know, especially listening to Genevieve's deputation, I mean, her focus seemed to be largely on vessels and commercial set netting and trawling, which was quite obvious. But of course, when we say no take in a marine reserve, that actually means no take of anything, including collecting shellfish off rocks, so or casting lines from shore. So in terms of that recreational and customary fishing, which Genevieve said can be okay in certain things, I think we just need to think about that a little bit more because marine reserves and the word no take is quite a blunt instrument. And there are, of course, heaps of other management tools that have been created, including Taiapure and Mataitai reserves, which can limit and even exclude commercial fishing. Alongside things like the Fisheries Act, Section 186B closures, there's lots of other tools that can be used in the toolbox. So I'm recommending that we change the words, and I think it's up on screen. So developing a comprehensive marine protected area for Hectares dolphins may be more straightforward. And that I've said we would love to work with MPI, DOC, Mana Whenua and the community on this. Because I think that's a good lead into any work we may do in our coastal plan in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling. So as far as I'm aware, that we've got all the proposed amendments up that I'd like to.
I would like to add an amendment, but I haven't seen all these amendments. So I'm not sure if my amendment's needed. So how are we going to deal with that?
Perhaps if I ask staff to run down from the top again, they might not necessarily be in order right at the stage on the screen. So that's the first one. That's replacing, well, essentially changing 2.3 on page 42 or page 6 of the actual submission, as Craig has just suggested. And the next one is changing the, oh, I can't actually read those ones. I have to look at this one. This is the conversation that Tumataya Yvette Couch-Lewis has brought to us around just a naming of the Hectares dolphins and putting in the Ngāi Tahu word there for Pokuhui. And adding in the word of immense concern to Environment Canterbury. Okay, so we can go down and then we've got the three that Lana's proposed, which is basically just being very clear around the habitat that we're wanting to make sure is covered, and the extension to the estuaries, harbours and bays. And that's it. Yes.
I think those ones are all really great. Oh, shoot, it's just gone. I want to amend. Well, I'm suggesting that we think about amending point 2.11, and this would affect the overall tone of the actual thing. What I'm suggesting on page 40, so it's 2.111. What I'm suggesting is that we make that into 2 points from the word environment, which is in the last sentence. And that we take a position to the government that they adopt a zero death tolerance, and that would change shall I speak to it? Well, I'm just so from the word environment. Canterbury notes that the sub and local population mortality rates of 35 fishing related deaths is a significant number. Full stop. The council wants this to be reduced to zero. So deaths are an absolute exception. We recommend zero tolerance to deaths from fishing.
Madam Chair, could I ask just for clarity that we talk about the timeframes in which those deaths are, because it 35 deaths with within a time without a time frame restriction doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I think we just need to. I'm not disagreeing with anything you say, Jenny. I just think we need to add a time frame.
So what I'm hearing is that Chair Huey would like to actually be quite strong around this and say that we have no tolerance for any deaths, and maybe that could actually just a very sentence like that could actually replace that last sentence. Councillor Pauling, Councillor Farr. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'd support that. I do just want to note it's actually just about aligning what is already in the submission. So at page 3 of the submission, or 39 of our papers, at 1.4, it says Environment Canterbury supports measures that will help reduce Hectares dolphins mortality rates to zero, as set out in Te Mana o Te Taia. Now, I think what Chair Huey is saying is just about really reflecting that more strongly in where the government specifically has their 35 number, which we're already saying. So, yeah, I totally support that.
Kia ora, I support that too. And Ian, just to your point, the modelling is a fisheries risk assessment model, and it's annually. It's on an annual basis. So currently it's 45 dolphin deaths annually, 18 with Banks Peninsula.
No, I was admonished by fellow councillors sitting next to me saying if you've got a zero tolerance, it doesn't matter what the time frames are. So.
Through you, Madam Chair. Oh, it's to you, Chair. I just wonder if you would be amenable to just putting at the end of that sentence that we consider zero deaths or have zero tolerance. That Environment Canterbury would like to.
Yeah, I just look. My reason for saying that is that if they adopted that, it gives a total different tenor to the whole, even the select committee and the hearings around this, however that's happening. Look, the staff will say, look, Canterbury Regional Council is saying zero tolerance, and it'll change. It's a strategy that I'm actually putting there. So I don't mind what words you put, and I think that paragraph 2.4 or whatever at 1.4 is really good. But this is just making sure it's consistent and getting that just where they're mentioning the numbers. It's really important. We want to move the government on this, so we need every tactic we can get. So that's what it's about.
So can I suggest that you might be comfortable with Environment Canterbury notes? This is basically what's in there. Notes that the sub and local population mortality rates of 35 fishing related deaths is a significant number. We're not arguing with that, and encourage zero tolerance.
I think we recommend zero. Just get rid of the other stuff, and but we recommend zero tolerance to deaths from fishing.
Okay, that's all right.
I'm just trying to minimise the changes to the. And we we want zero tolerance. What are we going to do? Oh, we recommend zero tolerance, rightio. Yep. Yep. Okay. Rightio. Hopefully that's all the recommendations. So just in your discussion, can we be thinking about what's actually been recommended? So any points? Anybody want to raise anything for discussion? Councillor Edge?
Just go back to the reference to the comment adding the word immense. I just wondered if it was the right clause. It says page 44, but I thought it was page 37 on the second paragraph of our letter in both.
37 and 44.
Yeah, that's fine. But starting point is 37.
You have a suggestion, Councillor Edge?
No, just simply that, page there, it's all fine, but it's just 37 and 44, it's repeated twice.
Just conscious of time here. We've got a lot to get through. So, Councillor Southworth.
I just want to say I totally support the submission and all of those amendments, and particularly I think the reference to zero tolerance is a sensible one, because we have the amendments essentially are listening to people who've brought additional knowledge to us, listening to our very knowledgeable staff, and it is all driving towards zero. It's driving towards minimising deaths, but it leaves it clear that if these proposals are not taken up or don't achieve what we're wanting to see, we're really clear about what, essentially it's indicating that there will need to be further action if that isn't enough.
Thank you. Chair Huey.
I'm just speaking to all the amendments. I support them all, and I want to thank staff very much for all their work they've done on it. It's fantastic to have you on board and all that knowledge you've got and putting all that effort into it. It's great. But if we talk about zero tolerance, it's a really good story. We're fed up with this. We're fed up with inaction and bureaucracy stopping actually the elimination of a species that's nearly dying out. We want the government to get the message that most of the population doesn't agree with this. And it's time they change the regulations to protect a species. We used to have a 12-mile nautical limit in New Zealand when I grew up as a child, and I have no memory of how it changed, but it did. And it's a ridiculous situation. We shouldn't be letting that happen. We should be doing, as the Canterbury Regional Council, whatever we can within our power to stop this. And I think it's a good story, and I suggest that we do what Councillor Craig's been suggesting for a while. We should put that out as something from this meeting, and we need to really push for this. And when we go to the hearing, if they're having one or whatever they're having, I think we should be in there, boots and all. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huey. Councillor Fairwater.
Thank you. I'm really pleased we're making this submission. I've learned a lot about more about Hectares dolphins from the reports and particularly too from I'd like to thank Genevieve Robinson for making a wonderful submission, really, and adding so much to our understanding today. And I just think that the word taonga that dolphin is for us is just absolutely accurate, and that's why people around this table are really passionate about it, and I'm really pleased we've got such a strong submission.
Councillors.
Kia ora. Look, I've been debating in my mind quite a bit around this submission. I work quite extensively with my iwi in terms of taonga species. I work with a critical species, two critical species. One is hoiho, which is affected by fishing practices and lack of knowledge what is actually happening out in the marine environment. We can all have our passion for our species, for our taonga species. I'm having a bit of difficulty in terms of looking at some of the wording, in terms of when we start talking about fishes, when we start talking about zero tolerance, are all the very things that need to be considered when we're looking at tonga species and when we are looking at extinction and being faced with extinction. But some of the things that we also have to take into consideration, and that is the economic side of things in terms of people's livelihoods, in terms of the fishes that are actually out there and the livelihood for them to be able to survive. That when we sit in isolation sometimes, even in our governance groups working with tonga species, it's easy for us, and it is because of the passion, in terms of saying that we want the zero tolerance. Yes, we do. But at the same time, please think about the economic side. And there is an economic side as well to be considered with tonga species in terms of the benefits for those species. But think about the implications that we're bringing about in terms of the cultural side of things when you talk about our harbours and about our estuaries, our hapua, that there is actually, they are critical places in terms of our people and their fishing practices that are actually within there. And I just want to bring that up to you because I just want you to be thinking along those lines when dealing. Yes, we go for low tolerance, for no tolerance. We don't want to see any of these species. But there are a lot of things we need to take into consideration and not look at them in terms of isolation. One of the things is that this is a submission and they will be taken into consideration. And I agree with you, Jenny, in terms of looking at the strategy that needs to be put in place to make sure that we are protecting our tonga species. But also please think about, and I just want to say that about our cultural side in terms of where our people and our fishers actually are and the impacts that sit on them. Kia ora.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so we're going to have Councillor Ms Mackenzie and Councillor Pauling, and then we'll move on to voting on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank staff for a really, really good submission. And also thank you for taking on board a lot of feedback from a lot of us on this. It's something that it keeps me awake at night. And while I acknowledge Tūmatau Katuas's comments, historically, many cultures have had temporary prohibitions and changes to the way in which they were fishing in order to restore populations of fish. And so I guess I see this as being that. I just worry that we actually might be too late in stopping the extinction of this species. But yeah, I wholeheartedly support this submission, and I'm very pleased to see the amendments that we've got up there. I support all of those also. Thank you.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, I support the amendments as well. I think that when I think about Upukahue and my interactions with them out on Whakaropo on Little Harbour, you know, it's always exciting when I'm paddling out there on the harbour and you see a Hectares dolphin pop up, one or two of them. They're pretty slow moving things at times. They can go fast, but they tend to hang out with you. It is a pretty special thing. And I don't think that actually, you know, in relation to what Yvette has said, I don't think any of our people would be happy with snaring a upukahue in their nets. I think they would be horrified, in fact. And so, you know, I do understand that there is some issues around customary fishing in particular, or recreational fishing with set nets. But you know, I love catching pataki and flounders too. But I think I'd be willing to go out on a limb here and say that you know, I'm happy to change my practice to try and help these dolphins. So I do support the zero tolerance thing for sure, and I have had a look, like I said earlier, at the data that is gathered by the Department of Conservation, and if you read that yourself, I think you'll be horrified too to see how many hectares dolphins are listed on that list and how regularly that happens. And if you look at the data, entanglement in commercial set nets and trawl nets is amongst those noted in particular. Yes, there are a lot that aren't able to be determined because they either wash up dead, and I've seen that myself in the harbour as well. I've seen a dead hectares float past me, and like I said, it's not a nice thing. So yeah, I support the amendments. I think it's a good message we send about zero tolerance, and I think we should do whatever it takes. And I think there is more work to be done, of course, with us, with DOC, with MPI, with the runanga, with scientists and with industry, to work out something better going forward. So yeah, really support what we've done. Kia ora.
Recommendations in your paper. Can you just flick back to the original 3, please? So I'd like to move. Well, no, I actually won't. Because there's some very passionate people in this room. Can we have a mover for the original 3 recommendations with the amendments as up on the table? We've got Councillor Farm and a seconder, Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you very much for that. So thank you, staff, for all your work in getting us to where we are. We'll now move on to the next report item, and that's 6.4, which is on the water monitoring. And we're going to get an update on recent results and new programs. Oh, sorry, I've jumped one. I'm in a hurry. We'll go back to 6.3. Apologies there, folks. This is on the Overseer Interim Solution Update, and I should know because this is really important to me. I'd like to hand over to Tim. I'm not sure you can present from there. I think Tim will be fine.
Thank you, Chair. It's yes, similar. It's a very important item. I can't say it's a great joy to bring it to you, but it is important that we do look at it. So the overseer model relates nutrient losses to farm practices, quite simply. It has been critical to Environment Canterbury over the last 10 years for setting water quality limits, particularly around nitrate nitrogen. A recent review of the model initiated by Ministry for the Environment and Ministry of Primary Industries looked at the model as a predictor of farm scale nitrogen loss across all of New Zealand, and it concluded that overseer can't be relied on for nutrient loss across New Zealand. It did say that it can be used as a line of evidence, but not solely relied upon. We, Environment Canterbury, are still required to implement our Land and Water Regional Plan, which requires overseer usage. Consequently, we, as Environment Canterbury staff, have been working with partners and stakeholders to develop an interim solution. And it's interim because it is until the new planning framework comes into place in 2024. That interim solution is about providing certainty. It's about upholding the intent of the Land and Water Regional Plan, a lot of which is to halt and reverse decline, to halt the decline and reverse decline of water quality. It's also important that it is simple to implement and audit and minimises costs to the community and council. In terms of consenting processes, we are proposing in the interim solution to move away from the use of a single overseer number, and you work towards a description of farm systems and mitigations rather than that number itself. And auditing of our farm environment plans focusing on change in farm systems since the last audit, and good management practice evaluation and adoption of nitrogen loss mitigations. It's important to note, as it does in the paper, that this will have no change in the privacy of information in terms of the audit information. That does not change under the proposed new system. Overall, this will lead to less certainty, but we are confident that it can continue the policy around the intent of the Land and Water Regional Plan. At the same time, it's also in the paper and worth pointing out that we are working at a national level on overseer improvement and development of other tools for managing nutrient losses. And I'm delighted to be able to report that a funding agreement has just been signed, I'm not sure if it's today or yesterday, by the Ministry for the Primary Environment with the Overseer Board around improvements to overseer. So that was approved by the Overseer Board yesterday, and it has been now the funding agreement has been signed. In terms of the next steps, there is communication around this interim solution that we are planning within the next week to 10 days. We will be reinitiating auditing, and we'll be reinitiating the processing of land use consents. And also, as noted at the end of the paper, we'll be bringing this back to this committee in 2022 around the implementation of that interim solution. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll now have questions of clarity, and we've got Councillor Sunkel and Councillor Mackenzie. John?
Thank you, Tim, for the paper that you've brought to us. Just some clarity for me. When I read the paper, I see that overseer may still be required in an audit process, and then a few paragraphs down it talks about further supporting data. Could you just clarify on where we're actually landing with that? Because there's a little bit of confusion in my mind. So yeah, some clarity, particularly in the audit process and what might be required in land use change or the likes, if you could.
Through you, Chair, the overseer is still required to get us through into, so in terms of consenting, to that's the way that overseer will be required. In terms of auditing, it is there as a line of evidence. So the idea is that we'll be using more descriptive processes of what's going on. If there is land use change involved, then it may be required to use overseer as a way of describing some of that change and the impacts of that change. So it is to do with when there are particular when there are changes of farm practices, I should say, not land use change, sorry, changes of farm practices, and therefore overseer may be required as a further line of evidence around what impact those changes will be. And it is on a case-by-case basis.
Supplementary then, so in the audit process, if I had an overseer file that showed my farm system and nothing had changed, that would inform the conversation, but my auditors would then look at my farm, look at the attributes, look at what's happening, and make a value judgment as to whether I was in compliance. If I was looking to change my land use or seek a new consent, then further information may be required. So that's the clarity I'm looking for in case folks sitting out there are wondering if they have to go through a multiple steps in an audit process, and you've clarified that for me. Thank you.
Tim, you made the point that you made the comment that you think it introduces greater uncertainty, but it would seem to me that if you have a model, the overseer model, and it was being used inappropriately, actually what you're proposing as a way of countering this should give greater certainty in terms of environmental outcomes as opposed to uncertainty about those environmental outcomes. It might create uncertainty about the process by which you're going through, but in fact, if you thought you had certainty by using a model inappropriately and that you were delivering environmental outcomes, the appropriate environmental outcomes, that would seem to have been an uncertain process. And so I'd like to think that perhaps this process is going to be more certain in terms of the things we're trying to achieve by the use of overseer and farm environmental plans and the whole process, that whole process.
Through, well, through, I look, yes, this is often to do with what you mean, what is meant by certainty, and what I was referring to is when there is an absolute number that you are compliant or non-compliant against, then you are certain. It doesn't mean that you are certain of the environmental outcomes. So yes, I take this one.
If there are no more questions, Councillor Scott.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I take it that Tim will be taking no part in the debate for it. No, right. Yeah, no. So this is clarity. So the clarity that I guess I'm seeking is around getting some sense of risk and legal compliance, I guess, and costs going forward in terms of what we thought we were going to incur and what we do incur. And we don't need to answer that here, but I'm quite interested to know that where we might sit with that going forward. So some clarity around that would be good. Is it going to cost more than we thought it would cost to get up and running again? And the second thing that I would like to just say while you're at the table, Tim, in terms of that agreement that was signed, I think that's a really good thing. But is there any sense that overseer or a model similar to overseer could sit in a public good space rather than a private ownership space? And the reason I ask that is because there seems some sense around the fact that the proprietary side of that may have been getting in the road of the public good. So you don't need to answer that if you don't want to. So.
Through you, Chair, the ownership of overseer into the future has been an issue of contention, and it has been discussed. As it stands at the moment, there is no proposed change around the ownership. There is, however, changes around the visibility within the model, and this has been was a key concern from the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment through an initial review of the model. And there are changes that are being proposed around the ability of people to be able to see what's in the model and therefore comment upon it.
Look, I've been a bit of a supporter to have this in a public space because of the visibility of it. We're pushing down a line at the moment, and we've put a lot of eggs in our basket around this model going forward. And I understand that we've now seen the light at the end of the tunnel, but I would be asking us to have some sort of a advocacy for it maybe in the future if it came along, if there's an opportunity.
Thank you. That's probably getting into a discussion topic, but another question of clarity, Councillor McKenzie.
Yep, just around point 27 under climate change impacts. It says it's recognised that overseer also models greenhouse gas emissions at the farm scale, and overseer may form part of future government initiatives for greenhouse gas inventories. And that the advisory panel didn't actually assess overseer's ability to predict greenhouse gas emissions. Moving into the future, are we going to sort of have a similar sort of cautious approach to using this kind of? What's your sort of sense for the future in respect of the greenhouse gas modelling that you've mentioned here?
Through you, Chair, I don't think at the moment, as it stands, because as a regional council, our role is around adaptation rather than mitigation. Those are national level discussions. We can influence those, and we do influence those. So it's not something that we have direct control, or we would be thinking about how we use it in a mitigation space.
I might just add, as part of the He Waka Ekanoa discussion that's actually going on at the moment by government, Maui and agricultural sector, primary industries, they are looking at a number of possible tools, of which this could be one. So just as adding some extra detailing. Councillor Pullen?
Oh, you've answered my question, actually.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, just do a little bit of homework on that one. Tūmatai Cranwell.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora, Tim. Just on point 23, just engagement, significant Māori participation. You've got there on the last line of that point 23, ngai tau tangata whenua advisory services to co-develop a solution. So is that working in the future in 2024? Or is that working straight away now with Maui?
It's through Chair, it's both. So, and very much both. So in development of this interim solution and then into the future as well.
Okay, there being no further questions of clarity, thank you, Tim, for talking to that paper. I will put the motion that the Natural Environment Committee notes the response of the Overseer Review and the rollout of a proposed way forward to 2024. Is there any extra discussion? We've had a little bit of comment. It's more discussion around. I've just put the motion. I can move it and you can second it. If there is no discussion, Councillor Edge.
Yes, I just like a few comments to make. This interim solution gives farmers and consultants an opportunity to think beyond GMP toward requirements of the NPS Freshwater. So the idea of short-term consents in the interim, to me, seems a sensible way that perhaps gives the opportunity to anticipate the requirements in this transition timeframe to 2024. And in saying that, I hope that the primary sector can upskill and educate their members to help develop bespoke on-farm plans that consider a greater range of descriptive elements, including things like biodiversity and wetland management, mahinga kai, and truly have a look at their farm descriptions and look at best fit activities, soil type analysis, those sorts of things. Look at reducing inputs that are going to come inevitably. Reconsider intensification of existing operations and look to land use change and diversity of land use change. And I think it's really important going forward that we consider, well, I'm happy to actually, consider the broader cumulative effects of any changes in consents within subcatchment context, because I think that is going to be an important way forward, that we can assess the implications of, for example, a collective of farms within a subcatchment and what their outputs are and the effects in that subcatchment. So I think the interim solution is going to help this process. But yeah, really just encouraging people in their applications to look for the longer term when they are submitting any changes to their existing systems.
Okay, no more comments that anybody wishes to make? Okay, if there is not, I'll move this. I'll have a seconder from Councillor Scott. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much for that. Right, this time we will move on to the water monitoring and recent results and our new programs. And I'd like to ask Helen Shaw to the table. And she's got us all. And Shirley, haven't seen you for a long time. Shirley Hayward. Welcome to the table. So, yes, if you'd like to talk to the paper, and then we'll take questions of clarification and you'll be able to.
Great, kia ora koutou. So I think you all know me. I'm Helen Shaw, the Surface Water Science Manager, and Shirley Hayward is our team leader for the water quality and ecology team. So between us, we should be able to cover your questions, hopefully. Right, so you've all got the paper that we put together. Just really, it's a bit of an update of where we're at with our recent monitoring and data, and a bit of a report on kind of things coming up. So I guess just to kind of summarise the key points, what we've sort of laid out on the paper is some results from the recent LAWA, Land, Air, Water, Aotearoa website update. So every year LAWA is updated with the previous year's statistics around water quality and ecology. So most of the metrics are annual ones. So that's updated every year, and we go through a process of sharing our data with other regional councils and doing some kind of cross-checking, and then that all gets put on the LAWA website. We also have just kicked off the recreational swimming site monitoring for the summer. There's actually an amendment. I made a slight error in the paper where I said that that was going to start at the beginning of December, but it actually started on the 15th of November. So we're well underway with that. And also sort of just prior to commencing our monitoring, we release a report or a memo this year actually summarising the grades for the sites. So while we make available the data about, you know, recent monitoring and E. coli for each of our swimming sites as we go through the season, and that's live on LAWA, we also have at the beginning of season a grade provided for every site about whether it's suitable for swimming or not. And so this year is fairly similar to last year, with the exception of a couple of sites that have kind of improved and a couple that have degraded. So what sort of happened there is the West Caroline Bay and Lake Apua have flipped from, well, not flipped, have moved from swimmable to unswimmable, and as a result of that, I think it's Lake Apua are the ones responsible for the signage at the lake, and the district council at Caroline Bay. Yeah, okay, district council. So signs need to be erected at those sites just to say it's unsuitable for swimming. So that's going ahead. We've got also in the paper, we've just sort of talked a little bit about the 3 new monitoring programs that we're scoping and piloting. So they came through in the long-term plan discussions last year, and basically got over the next few years, we'll be sort of scoping and piloting those new programs, and they'll be in conjunction with our conversations for the planning work. And so we're hoping to kind of, I guess, as part of co-design and partnership conversations around planning, will also obviously involve data collection and monitoring. And so we'll hopefully try and talk about all of those things at the same time. And also, just a bit of a summary, the water data program is nearing completion. We've currently got until the middle of the calendar year next year to run. We've got a lot of data already accessible, and we've shifted it into our cloud-based repository, and the scientists are making good use of that already. So that's pretty exciting. We're sort of still in the, I guess, early or testing stages of some of the visualization tools in terms of making that data a bit more widely available. And then finally, not on the key points, we have a quarterly freshwater report that is on our web. It actually uses it's automatically populated with data from our water data program around groundwater levels and river flows and things. And so that the next version of that is coming out next week. So just to be aware. So I guess that's a kind of high level summary. Open to some questions.
Right, we've got some questions. We've got Tumataya, Cranwell, Councillor Scott, Councillor Mackenzie.
Kia ora korua, tēnā korua, nei te mea kia korua mo tēnei ripoata. Thank you for this. Just on the, you mentioned on Opuha, on Lake Opuha, and I noticed there's 2 swimming sites there, one at Bennett's Corner and the other one, I think, where the red dot is on Airworks Corner as well, where the boat ramp is. Yeah, why is there one, on the same lake, I suppose, one green, one red? Is it just what's causing that at the top end of the lake there?
The primary reason is the site at the top end of the lake is close to where there are river inflows, and it's likely that poor grade or those high fecal indicator bacteria events are related to flood events. Just to be clear, for our rivers, when we calculate these grades, we remove rainfall affected data where it's clear that the conditions would deter a swimmer. But what we find in lakes and in bays, and from our observations over the last couple of years, is it's not always apparent that there's been rainfall, recent rainfall at that site. And so although, for example, Lake Opuha, the site that has a poor grade is probably affected by rainfall driven floods into the lake, it's not apparent to a person rocking up the day later that that's the situation. So we cannot do that rainfall affected removal of that data. So for that Lake Opuha site, it has deteriorated in terms of a fecal indicator bacteria concentrations. The site further down at Recreational Reserve near the dam head isn't so influenced by direct inputs, and so it tends to have a better water quality overall.
I think you just, I've just a comment on the water data, the data program that you've set up. Well done, getting it to where you've got it to, in terms of the information you can now share. So I'm just interested in who you share with in terms of that repository. Is that available widely to other science institutes?
So where we're at the moment is that the direct access to the repository is for internal teams. What it means is that our science team and our analysts are able to respond to queries a lot faster. So it's making their jobs a lot more efficient so far. We're just about to release an interface to allow external people to get our flow data. So the flow, just the flow data, because that's our most used or accessed data set. So that's kind of the first cab off the rank in terms of a direct interface that people can have. And then we've got sort of on the backlog of work, we've been thinking about ways for institutes to get more efficient access. It's not necessarily just through the official APIs for the interface way, but perhaps even getting into our repository if they have their own similar setup. So looking at that, but yeah, just flow at the moment, but the other data sets are a lot easier for our staff to access and then provide.
Councillor Liz McKenzie.
Yeah, I'm really disappointed to hear that Hewitt's Corner is now unswimmable in Lake Opuha. And I note that there was also some information from another source outside of ECAN recently, which indicated very high heavy metal concentrations in the sediments from the lake. Some of those compounds were consistent with long-term overuse of fertilizer. And I just want to ask, with the fact that the lake has flipped to being unswimmable in that area, what is being done in the Lake Opuha catchment with respect to compliant, GMP farm compliance? Are all the farms in that catchment compliant? Is there something further that we could be doing? Are we doing everything that we possibly can in order to actually reduce those nutrient or pollution into the lake?
Yeah, I guess one of looking at the assessment of the site, one of those is that kind of catchment assessment grades, and that's where the interventions and work on the ground can actually influence and help improve the the swimmability of the site. So I don't know, I'm not intimately familiar with exactly what's happening on the ground in the Opuha catchment, but that is certainly something that that sort of work can definitely influence the swimming grades.
Could some staff come back to me with what is actually being done in that respect? I'm just concerned that something's happening, and it's not obvious to me that things are happening to prevent that.
Councillor Farm, Clearwater and Southworth.
Thank you, and thanks for all your work in this space, and the information is great. I just had a question about sort of the water data program more broadly, and I get that it was really focused on those key questions. What I'm kind of struggling to get information on is sort of how much closer and how much has the water data program been able to help us in our sort of broader questions of where are we in terms of lag effects and how long we expect things to get worse before they then get better and that kind of thing. And I'd love to just hear some thoughts about where we are there. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the great things actually about working on the water data program and also knowing that we've got the big planning project coming up is kind of thinking about how we can help get some more information, out there and available for those sorts of assessments. So one of the questions, or a couple of the questions in our scope relate to, how does land use and land management affect water quality? And we've got a consultant at the moment working on kind of historical land use and land management in Canterbury and sort of trying to establish a timeline of what's, of what's changed and thinking about that in the sense of intensification and use of different tools and just land use types as well. And so we're actually just waiting to get an update from them, but it's pretty close in terms of we've got this sort of historical land use and land management map from I think the 1950s was the first one they did, and then we're sort of looking at how has it changed over time. And the groundwater team at the same time have got a groundwater lags project that they're working on, and so it's kind of that will look at what we understand about the groundwater lag times. And so the idea is to sort of put those pieces of information together so we can kind of have a look at how they work together, and then with our knowing what the water quality is at the moment as well, which we have brought through the water data program in terms of viewers and statistics. So kind of putting all of those pieces together to hopefully tell a bit of a story. Cool, thank you for that. That all sounds really fantastic. And my other point was maybe more something for the committee to consider. It was really about this is all really good in terms of snapshot data. What we need to keep coming back to is of course the longer trends. And we know that we were presented a year or two ago, sort of what a 30-year trend analysis looked like for the region in terms of painting another part of the picture than just these snapshots. So I don't know, I just want to flag, I don't know if we need a recommendation that it comes to the next meeting, but I don't know how we get that information out. We've been asking and it just doesn't seem to be bubbling up. So I don't know if it could work with where you're at with the groundwater project or anything like that, but I'm just raising it here and up for discussion about how we move forward with this. Okay.
And can I just answer that, because the paper does talk about us being limited by the number of samples, the sites with long-term data for over 10 years. So I'm presuming it would be a very small number of.
Clear. I'm talking specifically about a piece of work that we already saw, where there was an analysis done of the limited data that we do have on 30-year trends. And I'm just suggesting that maybe this committee could be a good place where that comes to.
I think we'll probably take that back and have a discussion.
I can probably through the chair, just briefly comment. I guess as part of the planning project, we're looking at trend analysis, statistics and trends. So that's definitely in scope for some of the initial work we're doing with our numbers for the plan. And yeah, I guess it's looking at trying not to be inconsistent with lower methodologies, but also looking to see if we can, all of the different, as you say, you can do trends on a lot of different timeframes. And so looking across that and seeing what we can do with the data that we have. Yeah.
Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you very much for the report. My first question is a simple one, and I might have missed it, but on our page 56 and 57, you've got the graphs around nutrients and clarity in macroinvertebrates. And I wasn't quite sure, and I could have missed it in the report, but what the DRP column sort of was for. And my second question now.
I can answer the first one. It's dissolved reactive phosphorus. It's phosphorus. Yeah.
The other question is on page 60 in terms of the rivers which aren't swimmable after 48 hours rainfall. to see the Twizel River is one of those. And I just wondered what the background, what the change is for that. Now there's new signage, especially in that whole catchment area.
If I can just refer to the Twizel, it has its water quality has deteriorated, even though so there has been, I guess there's been an increase in fecal indicator bacteria to the point where now we need that signage to advise that it's particularly linked to rainfall events, so that you do get a much higher fecal load during a rainfall event. But there has overall been a bit of a deterioration in that river as well from that ongoing monitoring. So that's what that change is now for that site. That it used to be good regardless of rainfall. Now it's fair, I believe the grade is, and requires that advisory note around avoiding swimming for up to 48 hours after rainfall.
Is that due to farming practices and changes in that whole catchment?
Look, we couldn't answer what the cause of that is. It's we can look into it. There's probably quite a few different developments in that catchment. You know, there is some potential farming changes, but there's also quite a bit of development extension of the Twizel township itself into that middle part of the catchment. Couldn't answer what's driving it.
Thank you. And my supplementary question, if I may, I just wondered about, thank you very much for the report. I just wondered if there's a way of having this data linked with the Christchurch's urban waterways reports, just so that in fact we see that part of our work too. I'm aware that, like example, that work was reported to the Zone Committee this last week. So just a way of bringing that work together.
I think this is a public document, Councillor Clearwater, so we could actually make sure that the your Zone Committee is actually aware of it. So yeah.
Through you, Chair, just also to point out that LAWA does have the Christchurch City Council data on it. I know which reports you're referring to, and I understand the question, but just noting that LAWA has the Christchurch City Council data on it, and when we're reporting on the region, we are including Christchurch City Council data in it.
Okay, we've got 3 more. So we've got Councillor Southworth, Councillor Edge and Mackenzie. Did I see Chair Huey have her hand up? We haven't quite got that far yet. Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I love data, and looking at visual data presented visually is great. And I had a look at the snapshots page and the water this season, and I know that it's all around water levels and flows. And I'm just wondering whether is there, because of LAWA, is that why we're not presenting water quality here? Or is there some other, or is that something that's to come where we'll do like snapshots with the quality side of things too? And I guess if it is to do, if it's that we just would direct to LAWA, I wonder whether on the page that's called Canterbury Water this season, whether there should be a link, something that points in that direction, because I think many people would think of water in Canterbury, the quality is also as important as the flow. So the question there, and if I'm not an opinion.
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess the genesis of the snapshot reporting, the quarterly reporting, came out of, we used to do a drought report when things were dry, and kind of advise on what the situation was, and kind of coming up to summer, letting people know how the groundwater levels and the river flows were looking. And so that's kind of the genesis of it, and the fact that those flows do respond on that sort of seasonal cadence, I suppose. And yeah, so LAWA has all the water quality stats, and again that's back to those being annual metrics. But yeah, I think putting those links together, if people are obviously interested in both, it is a good idea to at least have some of those links set up so they can get it.
Yeah, I get actually on that as a follow-on question. So in terms of, I'd understood that some of the water quality aspects can also have a seasonal component, no, the seasonal variation, hence why we time some of our monitoring at particular times of year. So it would be quite interesting to see that seasonal as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I will then go to Councillor Edge, Mackenzie, Pauling.
Thanks very much for the report.
Three to your right. Button.
I'm particularly looking at page 60 on item 19 there in the Ashley Rakahuri River. I mean, I realise this is a statement about the after rainfall, but Ashley Rakahuri just about every year has cases of cyanobacteria, potentially a dog death every year. I'd hate to think what will happen if there's a child death. But I'm just wondering, we never seem to be able to get to the bottom of that issue. And we had a presentation a while ago about some research which was being undertaken in terms of cyanobacteria and the relationship between low flows and heat. And we haven't really had an update of where that research is and how that impacts on the swimmability of rivers. I know there was some work being undertaken in the Selwyn River. But yeah, where is that research and how far away is an update on that research?
So there's ongoing research, and we could certainly offer to bring an update on the latest state of play on cyanobacteria blooms, particularly the mats that grow in our rivers, the Formidium that grows in our rivers. The basic the understanding to date is that there are multiple contributing factors, including nutrients, sediment, flow stability, and climatic conditions, sunlight, temperature, all contributing to this proliferation of benthic cyanobacteria in our rivers compared to 15 to 20 years ago. The biggest challenge is what levers do we have to control or reduce those blooms, and there are no simple answers to that yet. But if you would like, we can arrange to bring in the most recent research, an update of that.
That would be good, and I'm really glad that you're having a look at the causes of these problems in terms of looking more closely at land use activity. Certainly, the Ashley Rakahuri, over the years, there has been an indication that high fertiliser levels going into that low flows river are the cause of the problem and the suspicions of people, because this is pretty damning of where we are with our swimmability of our rivers. The public will be outraged that we're not making any improvements on this, and we need to deliver some answers to the public quickly.
We've got Councillor Mackenzie. Thanks. Just remind people that it's questions of clarity rather than opinions and discussion at the moment, please.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the deterioration and the signage around swimmability, when do we do analysis of where the E. coli comes from? I'm conscious of the fact that on the Ashburton River, for sake of argument, the ECAM did analyse the E. coli samples and sourced it back to Blackbill gulls, presumably. So somebody asked the question about, Councillor Clearwater asked a question about the Twizel River. It would be useful in terms of informing the public as to and us as to how we can clean up these problems from new sources. So do we have triggers by which we can use that, or is it a budget constraint? Or
yeah, I mean, we do from time to time look into the sources of the fecal contamination, and I guess it's driven by, I guess, quite significant changes or very high levels over a long time. So there's different drivers. It is quite expensive and time consuming to do it. So we sort of are fairly careful about where we where we go and help, what we do. So we do need to allow for it in our budget if we want to do it more extensively, I guess. And so, yeah, it does come down to looking at the different drivers, and if we can't kind of work it out from what we can see around land use and other pieces of information, then we'll go and do some fecal source tracking.
So when you say it's quite expensive, how much does it cost to sample? Do you know?
Depends on the type of analysis, fecal source tracking analysis, but it's certainly in the several $100s per sample. And it's extremely difficult logistically to successfully do. You need to have collected a sample at the time you've got a fecal contamination event and have the lab process it. So historically, we've attempted many different options of trialing how to still remains logistically inexpensive to do. So we do need to make sure it's targeted. But as Helen said, it is primarily when there's a change in the condition in the site and it's not obvious what's driving that change, we can start using these fecal source tracking techniques.
Thank you. We'll now move on to Councillor Pauline. I think that'll be the last one for questions of clarity, and we'll move on to discussion.
Hold on, I have a few comments and then a question. So
can't keep
sharing. Thanks so much for this. It's really interesting to look at the sort of national data versus Canterbury data. I know it's just the annual stuff that goes to Laura and things, but I thought the MCI data was interesting for Canterbury, sort of being a bit lower than the national. And I think it's great to see the the additional swimming sites being added. And really thank staff for updating us on the Matarangamari monitoring and the fish monitoring too, which I think is overdue to happen, and that'll be a really important piece of work, as has been mentioned about our co-design work for planning going forward. And it's great to hear that there's the other work going on to assist us in our sort of assessment analysis for the plans going forward. And the question I had around, and it's really great to see that there's a sort of pilot work going on around the Waitaki. One suggestion I did have, and it's sort of a question as well, about is there plans to do a stock take of what Mataranga monitoring we've already had done, not necessarily through Environment Canterbury, but through other either that Papatipi Runanga have done themselves, because I think that would be a good idea as well, so that we either focus on places that haven't had some cultural or Mataranga monitoring yet before we sort of design a big program. So that's the question.
Yeah, I'll have a go. I would expect that would be part of the conversation with Runanga. I know that the kind of piloting and scoping the program includes talking to every Runanga about what Mataranga monitoring means, and yeah, obviously what's been done and what they do, and then what happens going forward. So I would expect that to be part of the conversation.
Somebody wants to go next. Back here.
Carrying on from Councillor Pauline, just on he opened the door, so why not jump through it? It's just in regard to Mahinga Kai, and then because one thing Papatipi Runanga have talked about is Mahinga Kai standard, and then just wondering if there's a chance to, I know as part of the Matarangamari stuff you'll be working with Papatipi Runanga. We have recreational standard, and that's what a lot of the site's on. But and we kind of say Mahinga Kai standard would be a higher level because you have to have food gathering in that area. So is there a chance or a mechanism to actually add that in, or into the future anyway?
Yeah, I think that we'll be looking at a whole lot of ways to kind of integrate data sets and use what information we have or can gather to inform what we know and help with Matarangamari. So the way I see it, the initial stages of the Matarangamari monitoring program are that really very much that scoping and what do we want to do, and then basically, that'll take a couple of years, and then we'll be into kind of budget rounds again and long-term planning, and I think that will kind of weave into that long-term planning what we'd like to do going forward.
some staff wanting to add here.
Could I just? I just want to really quickly just point out that, in direct answer to your question, that we have a new staff member starting in January who has actually worked in this area really well. Elaine Moriarty, who's coming to us from Environment South, and when she was with ESR several years ago, she worked on exactly this issue. So she's not working in that field directly, but her expertise will be really important. So that's great.
Dave, did you want to make a comment?
I was just going to otherwise add, there is a target in the CWMS that was around the Mahinga Kai standard, and that was an undertaking as part of the CWMS with Te Runanga o Ngaitahu. Over the 10 years, we haven't been able to get that engagement because really it requires Te Runanga and the Papatipu to lead that standard and set that standard. So we've made the requests, but we haven't been able to generate a response to them.
Thank you. Look, I really appreciate the staff. We've sort of had a little bit of an inquisitorial here, but yeah, thank you for that presentation and answering the questions of clarification. And I know we have sort of branched off occasionally, but yeah, thank you very much. We'll now move to motion and open it up for discussion. So we have a motion on the table that I'm going to put on the table, which says that the Natural Environment Committee notes the information provided in this paper regarding Lawa, recreational monitoring programs and the water data program. And now I'm going to put it on the table for some discussion. We've had a pretty good discussion around it. Chair Huey.
I'd like to amend it and add request that staff report back with long-term trends of water quality and flows at the first meeting in 2022. So that's and a number 2 that we request staff, that we request staff to report back with long-term trends on water quality and flows at the first meeting in 2022. Sorry, I have.
I'll second that.
I just have a question of doability of that request. I know apparently we've moved on to a part where staff can't participate, but this wasn't a matter that was on the table when staff could participate. So knowing that we're heading into summer and everyone's on break, I just question whether this is a reasonable request to be making for the first meeting back.
Your point's very valid. Maybe we could be looking at an amendment which at the first opportunity.
Can I say that it's up to staff? If they can't do it at the first meeting next year, they say the second meeting. It's totally up to staff, open to staff to do that. That's what they should do about the resolution the councillors put forward. So if they've got a problem with that, they'll put it at the second meeting or the third meeting, whatever they can do. But if you don't put time-based, I've just been told that this was shown to the whatever they were called thing that we had in the first year, and it's taken 2 years now of people asking around the table. This is not the first time I've heard Lan ask it, and we haven't got it. So I think if staff always have the ability to come back and say that to us.
Through you, sorry, I don't need to go through you. Chair, sort of changing that word as early as possible.
Oh, all right, put it early as possible. But what I'm trying to say is that staff can do that if they want to, but put it as early as possible.
So, Councillor Scott?
Well, only that if it was to be the first, and I take Chair Hugh's point, then it would be a case of collating any information we got right away, and it would be an incomplete piece of work. So, but we can work on getting it as soon as we possibly can.
Councillor McKenzie?
I'm not happy for the change. I'd like to be kept as seconder, to be kept as it is, and Chair Huey's comment about the staff will come back to us in the new year to say that it's not doable or when it might be doable.
Can I just say that's open?
Chair Huey, are you happy with it to be changed or not to be changed? Okay, so do we need another seconder? The seconder is not happy with that, so we'll need another mover and a seconder.
I'll continue with the seconder. You've asked the question of the chair, but she seemed to be a bit concerned about that, so I expressed my concern too. But if she's okay with that, then I'll.
We have Councillor McKenzie.
I don't want to address this particular point, but I'd like to flag that an additional request, and it goes back to this E. coli and the swimming spots. And so whether you want, so I'd just like to flag that I'd like to pass a motion or do something, make a request of staff, whether you would like me to talk about that now or later after you've dealt with this amendment.
Could I, as chair and listening to the conversation and your line of inquiry of staff, suggest that as co-chairs that we work with our support team and get that onto a council.
Okay, well, look, if I can just very briefly talk to it then, Madam Chair, and that is, it seems to me that one of the big frustrations of our community is we put up signs saying you can't swim. But in fact, it would appear that we never be able to, we very rarely seem to be able to do anything about that. And it seems to me that if there are budgetary constraints on us analysing the source of the contamination, which presumably is a precursor to being able to actually fix the problem, we need to be thinking about that. And as a priority, I would have thought that's a much higher priority than sticking up signage personally. And so perhaps we could have a discussion about that at some stage when it's appropriate and when the co-chairs are prepared to bring that forward to us. But maybe, you know, even if we could, if it is a budget constraint, maybe we consider that for the annual plan. And it may not be increased expenditure, but a reallocation of priority.
Thank you. I think that as co-chairs, we can definitely take that on board and deal with that whether it comes back or it comes as a briefing or however. So, point taken there. Is there any other discussion people would like to have on this? No. So we have an amendment. Oh, sorry, Councillor Campbell.
If I may, I would like to just briefly comment on the process. Look, I think that I'm very pleased to see that amendment there, and I think it's timely. I think it's important that, you know, we can ask as councillors, we can ask staff for certain work to be done, and of course, if it's urgent, we can ask that. That's our prerogative. It's also the prerogative of staff to come back, obviously, and say if it can't be done, and that's a reasonable way of working together. So I think what has been requested is totally good process.
Thank you very much. We have an amendment here that's been put on the table, moved by Chair Huey and seconded by Councillor Edge. I'll deal with the amendment first, that we request that staff report back with long-term trends and flows and water quality as soon as possible in 2022. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Right, so now we'll move to the substantive motion, which is 1 and 2 together. And I'll take it as everybody can read that. I'll move that. Do we have a seconder for those?
Did we already have one?
No, because I just put the motion on the table.
I'll second.
Councillor Paula. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, so that's the conclusion of 6.1. It is 1 o'clock. Councillors' dinner is there, and Chair Curie is very hungry. And I really do apologise to the staff that have been sitting in the room for the next 2-3 papers that are to come, but we are looking to reconvene at 1:30 and complete the meeting then. Then there will be immediately at the conclusion of the Natural Environment Committee meeting, a run through for the transport and urban development.
Yeah.
Yes, there will be. Our governance team have advised us how we will do this.
It's time.
So lunchtime, we're adjourning and we'll come back at 1:30 for a prompt start. Thank you. I think we're going to make a start. We've got the relevant staff in the room, so we will come out of adjournment and restart. Reconvene. Sorry, that's the right word. Yes, reconvene's the right word. So we've finished with 6.4 and we're now up to agenda item 6.5, which is around the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Committee update. And before we go on, I'll just welcome Councillor Tana Apanui. So you might want to just note that he's now joined us. Hi, kia ora Tane. So in the interest of time, I'm going to pass straight over to you, Murray. If you'd just like to speak to this paper, we'll take it that everybody has read the paper and the 10 action plans that were circulated. But yeah, the floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Claire, and through the co-chairs. Thanks for the opportunity to provide this succinct update on the CWMS zone committees, and particularly where they've got to since the refresh that occurred sort of through April through July this year, and following on from long-term plan, which included in that the direction, I guess, for the committees to get out and develop action plans, which we've provided as a complete set. So partly that was really for your benefit too, is having a record at some point in the future. You might go, I wonder if I could see one of those action plans. So if you recall this NEC committee, you'll be able to find all of them in one place. And also just to highlight, I guess, the good work that the comms team have done in support of the committees and getting a consistent approach and feel to those action plans across the whole region. The other just quick touch points, I guess, to following on from developing those action plans is to start to utilise the action plan budget as we've defined it, that sits with each of the zone committees, which is 50k per zone. So with some good guidance from the biodiversity staff in particular, following on from the shared experience with immediate steps that in particular committees are used to as well, they've hastened us to put some focus before Christmas on what sort of priority projects they'd like to consider putting funding towards. So that hopefully sets us up in particularly in the quarter after Christmas, that we can come back and do some processing of those projects, which should alleviate having a rush at the closing on June 30 and wondering what to do. So committees have made pretty good progress, I think, in terms of starting to get a sense of how to utilise this budget, and I think they'll only get better as we collectively settle into that. So part of that side of it as well, from a facilitation team perspective, is getting the administration of that budget set up, and we're getting some great support from business and customer services to set that up within Microsoft Dynamics 365. So that will go live for us to start our sort of training and processing of initial projects next week. The other 2 points just to note is part of following on from the refresh, we discussed it and have held 2 hui so far, looking at a southern, a central and a northern approach to the committee. So the 4 southern zone committees, the 3 central and the 3 to the north. The 3 to the north including what will become a new Puranui Water and Land Committee in time. But the 2 hui we've held so far, which we used as an opportunity for new committee members to come to a session with the chairs and deputies, so that there's sort of a shared learning opportunity, worked pretty well. And from the feedback from the committee members themselves, they quite like that approach to, I guess, have still a localised approach to it in terms of South Central and Northern, but equally we can sort of bring issues to them across the whole region using that sort of format. And the other component to that is it's aligning very well, I think, and will prove its worth over time and how it aligns with operations and probably other sections of council in time. The northern hui, we've actually deferred to the new year and the first quarter of next year. We think that's an option. We've only got 2 new zone committee members in the north, so we thought we'll just do some one-on-one with those 2, one in Waimakariri, one in Kaikoura, and look at a more strategic session probably in February next year, which may give us an opportunity to pull 1 or 2 people. Even if the new Huranui Water and Land Committee isn't formed, there'll be some, and we already know there's some staff appointments at Huranui that could be part of that process. So just taking the opportunity to include them in that in the next quarter. And the final point that we've included in there is something that you've already had updates on, but with the regional committee, with the co-chairs now in place, we've in October had the selection process for the community representatives, and the recommendations from the selection panel will be coming to you next week at the 9 December council meeting. So I'll leave it there and open up for questions.
Thank you. Is there any questions of clarity of Māori around this? Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Murray. Not so much clarity, but just perhaps a question around, like, starting with the Christchurch West Melton report. And the action plans are great, and I've enjoyed the West Melton, Christchurch West Melton process. I just wonder at this stage, when I look at them, and Councillor I don't know if she's online, I was going to ask her about the Expenditure ones, where I think the action plans are very ambitious, and there's a lot of key points and a lot of work to be done, and it's great to have some new members. Where I'm just wondering if I just had an impression that it might be quite good to somehow consolidate some of those goals with the plan. Just wonder what your thoughts on that might be.
I think it's a good point, Councillor Clearwater. In terms of for all the committees, I think they've done a pretty good job of aligning their priority setting around what have either been important areas with their zips or the zippers, and it's been coming at them. But inevitably, having worked with committees that have had previous sort of 5-year action plans as well, or priority setting processes, it is something you kind of learn a bit about as you go as well. And I think even utilising the budget, I would incorporate into that there is probably a settling phase over the next year where we get more familiar with it. It also starts to highlight some areas where you either can consolidate, as you're suggesting, or identify that you think actually the way we've approached this or measures that we've got could be refined further. So I think there is something that each of the committees will learn in terms of how well they've started the process and how easy it is to kind of advance. And that, as support staff to them, that's partly our job, to assist them, to adapt them as they go where they need it.
Thank you. I've got Councillor.
Thank you. Thanks for all of these, and that'll be great when it's all ticked off and we've done all of that. Anyway, I was interested to note that there are a number of different zones where private drinking water wells and raising awareness around testing and so on is in here. And I'm wondering, I know our zone committee, so Murray's on the Southern Waihora Zone Committee that I'm representing. And so we've already run a couple of those days, and they were really well attended, in fact almost too well attended. So we did some learning around how to try and, thinking around how to manage numbers and all those things. What I'm interested in is how would that learning, how would it get distributed out to enable other zone committees to manage that more effectively? Like, is there a mechanism? Because it's not even like it's the mid group, they're very here and there. And I suppose then maybe a question for staff more generally is, at what point does something actually become something that should be coordinated as a Environment Canterbury function, or something that we actually put on separate? Because the zone committee obviously had their 50k and it was quite staff intensive, albeit we could reduce the amount of staff potentially, or type stuff turning up. But yeah, so I'm interested really from you, Murray, how the linkage where there's some common theme across more than just the zone, like those amalgamations, how does that work there? But then I guess maybe to Tim, or maybe it's to come back, you know, at what point do we pick something up that's got such a strong thread across the region and actually look at it as something that's done quite separate from the 50 kph zone?
Again, another very good point, and one that we will continue to work at. I think as an immediate response, one of the, I guess, other areas of Environment Canterbury that has taken that southern, central and northern approach is the comms team. So we now have a southern, central and northern principal for comms. So I think between us and facilitation and other staff that are working in those areas, particularly around an issue like that from the science team, but the comms teams and those principals' capacity to start for us to identify those issues which are region wide, or where there's an opportunity to take out consistent messaging across the whole zone, I think actually exists. So again, that probably reinforces taking that sort of approach that we've done in this instance. So yeah, with comms, I think being able to help identify those opportunities.
I'll just go to Tim before we move on to Councillor Farm.
Two comments. The first is that this is the sort of thing that the regional committee could pick up through thinking about, you know, what's coming through as major issues across the whole of the region. The second is just that this is a difficult area for Environment Canterbury because it's not our function to test private drinking water. And what we have done so far has been very much in support of zone committees in order to kind of raise awareness of zone committees and the work that's being done. So it's just a difficult ground for us, I won't say.
Thank you. Councillor Farm.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, sorry. The button's on. Cool. I'll try again. Okay, I'm getting feedback. It's fine. Hey, thanks. I just wanted to. Thanks, Murray, for your work in the space and support with the regional committee as well. I just wanted to respond to Councillor Clearwater's question. I think I think I captured it mostly. Was it broadly that you thought that Banks Peninsula Zone Committee, for example, had been a bit ambitious in our action plan? And I just wanted to respond. I actually really like the way that the zone committees are starting to undertake this sort of new approach with our action plan. For our zone committee, I think people are feeling particularly motivated by it. We have leads who lead each action, and then we have supporting people that support the leads as well. And we're actually getting some really cool progress. I also like the way that staff are working. It seems we're kind of holding the committees like a bit lightly, and we're allowing for that flexibility between committees and things that might be at different scales. And I just really want to commend the way that this is working. And obviously we still have a long way to go, but for a new approach, I think it's going well. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lan. Councillor Pauling.
Yes, a couple of comments and then a couple of questions. Hey, first of all, thanks so much for your work and all the staff involved in this. I think it's amazing actually that we've got 10 or 9, is it 9 plans all done in sort of a great time frame. I think that's amazing. I wasn't actually expecting that from an update about the zone committee. So thanks so much. And yeah, I think the work around the regional committee looks exciting. I think we're all probably excited to see where that'll take us, or the regional committee will take things. And I do think it is a good idea if they do look at the action plans and have a sort of an assessment and say, hey, what are the sort of common threads here, and can the regional committee pick up some of these and sort of take them a little bit further? I think that'd be a good idea. So I'm looking at Lan and Timothy Cranwell, and hopefully with Jane on board, then that'll be great. And yeah, really good to see the idea about the northern, central, south sort of collectives, because I think there was a massive bit of feedback that came from the regional committee change that people were concerned about how they connect, and it sort of goes to Councillor Southworth's point. But I do think the regional committee can help with that still as well. So my two questions were, and one thing sort of similar to Councillor Clearwater, yeah, action plans, and then I'm interested in like the work programs and the actual stuff, which comes maybe with the $50,000 and how they decide to work that. But I'm wondering if any zone committees, and this might be from the people who are working with them, are looking at external funding, maybe going with another zone and looking for some funding, maybe from central government or something like that. I'd be really interested, or maybe that should be encouraged, in fact. So that's a question, if there's any that you know that are looking at external funding. And then the other question is, when are the zone committees coming back to do their reports? Is that partway through next year? That'd be good to know.
Thank you, Craig. I think the suggestion of looking for other funding is something that we should expect to have happen, purely by the fact that you've even got funding or a budget to utilise. Probably takes you into contact with other potential funders for projects. So I think increasingly, particularly looking into year 2 and year 3, we should start to see that emerging. The nature of some of the projects, I think we'll even find in year 1, is naturally complementing other resourcing that's going into projects, but I think that's right to encourage that. And the other thing that we're looking to do, again, I think it will, certainly by the time we get to June, we should be a lot more familiar with the work programs as well. And so we're looking to have a session even with the zone mega managers and the facilitation team to even start to look at the alignment, is the mantra that I'm using, just in terms of having got action plans, looking at work programs across it, and looking at where they either converge or whether there's new opportunities, and also avoiding some duplication where we might stumble onto the same good idea, or a committee, as you can imagine, possibly walking in and not being aware of the fact, if we put 10K to that, but an operation program is already delivering in that space. So those are things to look at, and that I think we'll increasingly we'll get more familiar with over the next 6 months. And leading on to that, your second question, I've talked with Phil Roberts from the comms team, having done annual reports, which is a timely request. Up to now, have been on a calendar, so they've tended to be a January to December type of report. But having embarked on this new way of doing things from July 1, I thought that the way we've done the refresh cycle, it makes sense to shift the reporting to an end of financial year. So that's why you're not seeing annual reports or progress reports now, but we look to get them more in the June-July space.
A quick small question.
It's just I'm just congratulating you on this. It's a great format and well done. My question is the Merrill Forum seen this year?
But we're having packaged it up. We in terms of the action plans.
Yeah, this year, quite good to see.
Yes, so I think you're probably seeing them as a group first, but yeah, that's something that I think we're scheduled for an update to the Merrill Forum. I've seen the email come through, so yeah, we can include this as part of that.
Thanks. Yeah, like others, I was really impressed to see the action plans. I was really impressed to see the individuality of them actually, and I guess you'd expect that when you've got various district councils actually putting forward their priorities as well as Environment Canterbury alongside them. So really impressed to see that, and the fact that some of the committees have actually put in their own vision or you know, what their purpose, they see their purpose to be as well. So yeah, I think it'd be fantastic to probably get these through to the Merrill Forum and share them. I do have one question, and it's really around the fact of the priorities. We as a council had a lot of discussion around that and making sure that Runanga had an opportunity to put input in as well. I don't see any sign that they have from the action plans. Is that correct? I mean, they're obviously providing guidance to the Runanga representatives on each of the joint committees, but yeah, just wondering, did any of the Runanga take up the option of putting in their expectations?
In response to that, the formality of it, including it in alongside the councils, wasn't taken up. So that isn't something that, if you like, features on the front page of each of the action plans. So, but as an illustration, I think of in working with the Waimakariri Committee, we got a lot of guidance around the Mahinga Kai priorities and how that was to be worded and worded from a Ngāi Hariri perspective. So, yeah, whilst I guess some of the original wording in terms of the Zone Committee review was to have Runanga priorities alongside the councils, the way we worked through that hasn't occurred, at least in this iteration. But certainly it's been, yeah, from my perspective, actually working into finalising the action plans, it's been quite good to get into the how do we actually shape this up and do this in a way that involves, you know, particularly obviously the Runanga representatives and the committees actually guiding committees on how to do that.
Thank you very much for that. Why is it keeping disappearing? That the Natural Environment Committee receives this update on the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Zone Committees, their action plans and budget, and open it for discussion. So does anybody have any discussion? Councillor Scott?
Yeah, I'll just remind councillors, I guess, that this is a CWMS initiative, which is a mayoral forum initiative, which they are big partners in this. One of the things I really like about this is how it's started to grow again, and the regional committee is back in a form, and I think that bodes well for us going forward. And I know that in terms of the local zone committees that I'm not part of but associated with, they're pretty keen that we've got a new start, so that's good. Thank you.
Just very briefly too, I certainly concur with what Councillor Scott has said, and I sense, you know, our committee, for example, is quite revitalised and really working on things. So I think that this is a really good way forward. So happy to second it.
Yeah, thanks for putting those together, Murray. In terms of the Kaikoura committee, that the local Runanga representatives had a big say in helping to shape through the very small dedicated team of people up there. So that's reflected in the action plan. We had our meeting on Friday where we discussed how to spend the $50,000, and we pretty much landed on that with a bit of fine tuning, but trying to be realistic to spend that money before the end of June on projects that we could, or at least start some projects and then forward that on. So it's all working pretty well, I think.
There is no further question on.
Sorry. So in terms of following up your suggestion, there was we had a process that we went through. I need Murray to answer. The staff produced okay, just discussion. Just following up from Councillor Pauling's query and my comments about Kaikoura. On Friday, a really good thing that happened was that there were some bullet points of about 5 or 6 items that we went through. Does the project meet this? Does it meet the action plan? Blah blah blah. And one of them was to do with potential for external funding. I suspect, I know through you, Chair, if you could ask Murray, has that list of those bullet points been conveyed to other members, or is it something I'll see later, Murray?
This is very difficult when it becomes about a specific committee. In this instance, I will let the question be asked, and the staff member may like to answer that one.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, that the That said list is still on our wall. We brought it back down, so and by referencing that, it has an enduring shelf life. So I think, and across all the committees, that is some of the material that we've even used from a facilitation team just to help make sure that we've got some consistent support for all of the committees. So I think that's part of what we'll increasingly be using, particularly as we start to make some decisions and implement some of that budget funding.
Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion? If there isn't, I have moved this. I will move that. Got the wrong one. Sorry, I've gone on page 2. That we receive, that the Natural Environment Committee receives this update on the Canterbury Water Management Zone Committees, their action plans and budget. And I've got a seconder, which was Councillor Clearwater. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, Murray. Moving right along, we are now going to go to the agenda item 6.7, which was brought forward around the Central Biosecurity Advisory Group update. I'd like to call, we've got Zoe coming to the table. You're going to be joined by the technical team. We've got in the room, we've got Rich Langley and and we've got Lawrence is online. I saw Lawrence online before, Lawrence Smith, and we're also Councillor Ian McKenzie, who is the chair of this group, is also going to provide some information here in support of Zoe. So I take it that everybody's read the paper, Zoe, and you might like to just highlight a few points there that you might like to raise. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you, Madam Chair, for introducing me. I'm Zoe Buxton, and as you've said, we have Rich Langley in the room to support this item, and Lawrence Smith online. I am a strategy advisor for the Biodiversity and Biosecurity portfolio. Rich is the Biosecurity Project Coordinator, so he facilitates the Biosecurity Advisory Groups, and Lawrence is a Principal Advisor for Biosecurity. So the purpose of this report is to provide you with an update on the recent activities of Environment Canterbury's Central Biosecurity Group. This is an information item, no decision is being sought today. I'll speak briefly to the first half of this report, which provides some background information on the Biosecurity Advisory Groups. And then, yes, I will pass you on through the chair to Councillor Ian McKenzie, who will speak to the update from the Central Biosecurity Advisory Group in his role as the chair of this group. And we're happy to take any points for clarification questions after that. So the Biosecurity Advisory Groups are community advisory groups of Environment Canterbury. The groups were established in 2019 as a evolution of the pre-existing pest management liaison committees. And there are 4 groups: Northern, Central, Southern and Christchurch Banks Peninsula. The groups have a dual purpose as set out in the terms of reference. Firstly, to support the effective delivery of Environment Canterbury's regional pest management program, and secondly, to encourage community involvement in biosecurity in Canterbury. And the groups achieve this purpose in a number of ways, including by providing local advice and feedback on biosecurity issues, and in particular the groups play a really important role in providing a local perspective on regional biosecurity issues that Environment Canterbury has a role in managing. The groups also advocate for and champion the role of communities in protecting Canterbury from biosecurity threats, and they liaise with their own local communities to gather feedback from the communities and bring it back to our biosecurity team to be considered and incorporated into the regional pest management program. The groups are made up of 7 to 10 community members appointed by Environment Canterbury, And those community members are supported on the groups by a territorial authority councillor representative, a Runanga representative, and an Environment Canterbury councillor. So the Environment Canterbury councillors and also the current chairs of those of the biosecurity advisory groups are Councillor Edge for the Northern Group, Councillor Ian McKenzie for the Central Group, Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie for the Southern Group, and Councillor Lund Farm for Christchurch, Banks Peninsula. The groups meet quarterly, and at these meetings, our Environment Canterbury biosecurity staff provide a regional and local update on the regional pest management program, facilitate discussion amongst the group, and also seek advice and feedback on specific biosecurity issues. Under normal circumstances, the meetings are open to the public, and members of the public are encouraged to attend. And where issues are being discussed that intersect with the work undertaken by other agencies or community groups, organisations, then members of those or people from those agencies or organisations are invited to attend to share the expertise and to join the discussion. All of the meeting materials from Biosecurity Advisory Group meetings are available on the Environment Canterbury website, so agendas and minutes and any updates from staff, as are the terms of reference for the groups. The Biosecurity Advisory Groups operate on a 3-year term, so we're 2 years into the first term of the groups. So the membership will be refreshed towards the end of next year. So this is going to give us an opportunity to reflect on how the groups have been working in their first term. So we will take a look at the terms of reference for the groups to ensure that the groups are best set up to achieve their stated purpose. Through you, Chair, I'll now pass over to Councillor Ian McKenzie, who will present an update on the recent activities of the Central Biosecurity Advisory Group.
Thank you, Zoe. And look, I won't read everything that's in the paper, just to refer you to points 13, 14, 15, and 16, and make some comments. One is the Central Advisory Group is very diverse in terms of those who sit on the committee, which means that some people fall asleep and others are highly motivated, and then things flip, and those that are asleep wake up and become highly motivated, and the others go to sleep. But it makes for good discussion. I'd point out that point 13, in terms of early intervention, those who come from the bee industries and the seed industry were heartened and fully support the early intervention strategy that ECAN uses for biosecurity pests and weeds, and that fits with the GIAs, the general industry agreements that most of those, but certainly the bee and the arable industries and the dairy and livestock industries have signed with central government. So they were heartened by that alignment. We've workshopped communications engagement. We had a good workshop on wilding pines up in the Waimaka area, specifically around Castle Hill Village. And the interesting thing about that was the diversity of opinion from neighbours. Some who thought we should be planting conifers up in the high country, and others who wanted to cut them down. So it's, not everything is black and white in these discussions. I might suggest that there's been a degree of frustration in the discussions we've had in terms of what some people see as weeds and biosecurity threats, but because they don't hit our threshold as a declared pest or weed, we have no jurisdiction over those issues. And so, whether it's sycamores and native bush or whatever the invasive pest is, there's a degree of frustration from some members that that's outside of scope. But I think they're getting used to that. And for an area that doesn't have wallabies or Narcella tussock, there's an awful lot of us who now are experts on both these subjects. But this is not a bad thing.
Thank you for that. So we've had our two speakers to the item. I'm going to open with a question or a comment and a question, I guess. And it really is around the comment in the paper where you've talked about the establishment and it being a community led group basically for the community, and talked about a review of the groups in late 2022, so late next year. The terms of reference when they were established, they were really well, we tried to think very carefully about them and trying to get some overlap a little bit around the chair's position. In the initial year as a new committee, we did think that there was some real value of having the councillor, the Environment Canterbury councillor, as the establishment chair, and I think that's the term that's in the terms of reference. And acknowledging if we had a 3-year term that we really would like to try and get a bit of an overlap. I understand that there hasn't been any elections go on in these committees, which I guess personally concerns me a little bit, but I'm just wondering, is there some way that you could actually be looking at that early in the new year, so that even though you might be looking at reviewing the community members, it won't be 100% of them, I shouldn't imagine, and it's consistent with the terms of reference that you've actually already got. So just wondering whether that's staff have given that any thought.
I think definitely the position of the chair is something that we have been considering, particularly when thinking about how these groups will go on into the next term. But I will pass over to Lawrence Smith, who's online, to respond to that question.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting a bit of an echo here. It's disrupting me. We have been considering going from the establishment chairs and transitioning to the member chairs. We've had a few issues around, particularly the COVID impact, having to move a lot of our meetings online. Workshopping agenda items has become difficult because of that. The induction of members into the groups has taken longer than we thought to ensure that the members have a good understanding of regional biosecurity. So some of the options we've discussed recently with the establishment chairs, the councillors, is the possibility of putting or transitioning to member chairs either early in the new year or later in the next calendar year, or perhaps even so that's before the council elections, or perhaps waiting till after the council elections, and also once we get to the stage where we're reviewing the groups and the membership of those groups, so at that 3-year stage. One of the other issues that's come along, it's not an issue really, but it's a good thing, is that we are establishing a technical advisory group. Now, some of the members of the current biosecurity advisory groups have expressed an interest on being on that group, which is a very technical group involving experts in their fields around ecology, botany, and so forth. So some of those members have expressed an interest in moving to the technical advisory group from the biosecurity advisory groups. So we just thought maybe waiting at least until the new year before we go to the member chairs, because some of those people might like to move over to the other committee.
Thank you, Lawrence. I'm not sure why we're getting an echo because all our mics are off in here. Is there any other points of clarity that anybody wishes to raise? No, thank you very much. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Councillor McKenzie, for your input, and you, Lawrence, as well. Thank you. Rob. I will put the motion that the Natural Environment Committee notes the Biosecurity Advisory Groups are community advisory groups that support the delivery of Environment Canterbury's regional pest management program and encourage community engagement with biosecurity, and that 2, that we note that the recent activities of the Central Biosecurity Advisory Group, including providing advice on community engagement methods, supporting the national wallaby and wilding conifer programs, and encouraging youth engagements. So is there any discussion that anybody would like to have on this item? There being not, we will then, could I have somebody that will move that, please? Great, Councillor Pauling, seconder. Councillor Liz McKenzie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Motion is carried.
Raise just one issue about the chair, the proposal to change the chairs. As far as I'm aware, we haven't had a discussion as chairs of those bags about that, and although I wouldn't pretend to be a particularly good chair of the bag, I'm not sure that the system is broken, and so I'm not sure that we necessarily need to fix. There is a problem that needs fixing, and I would note that because of the very diverse nature of certainly the central bag, that actually finding someone who sits in the middle and can be neutral on the issues might, may be difficult depending on who you select as chair to replace the councillor.
Thank you. I took from the conversation that staff are obviously giving it some thought and that it will be coming back for further discussion. So thank you very much for that. Program. Put my glasses on. I think Anita must be online. Anita, would you like to talk to this program or the item? Yeah.
Thank you. There's an echo here too. Tēnā koutou katoa. Through the chair, yes, this paper is the second in the Utu Kitai series, the first one being on the hill and high country. So this paper focuses on the plains, lowland streams and urban waterways. I would note that the braided river component that was asked for is going to the Catchment Subcommittee meeting. So the purpose of the paper today is to provide you with an overview of a range of activities that this organisation is carrying out to improve the health of these receiving environments. We'll take the paper as read and through the chair be happy to take any questions or comments. Noting that Johannes is in the room to assist with any questions, particularly on the southern and central zone. Thank you.
Okay, we have one hand up. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'll just make it's a comment more than a question, and that is that I hope this council is aware of that not everything it does on the left hand is connected to what happens on the right hand, and when it comes to lowland streams, and certainly the demise of lowland streams in the Hinds area is directly attributable to the regional council requiring the district council to close down the stop water ray system, which has had a huge effect on the ecology and the flows in a lot of the lowland spring-fed drains. And it would be quite nice if those remaining drains that are still alive, that the policies and strategies could link each other up. That if we're genuinely interested in preserving these remnants, that we actually link up that with the associated water sources which are associated with those water.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. A little bit of discussion there, but should have stated clarity. Is there any other points of clarity, Councillor Clearwater?
A couple of questions, if I may. So, thank you. Could you hear Johannes and Anita is online there? Look, I just had a general question, which I just wanted, and I've flagged it to staff. It's around where the previous, when we take in the work that we see under the umbrella of Three Waters, and part of that has been the Healthy Waterways Action, just how and now those sort of programs, and I'm aware that that is run in conjunction with City Council and others, but just how in fact that fits into, I guess, this work program. Or is it kind of like a new, I'm not sure. That's my first question.
Could I just ask for, so what exactly is the question through the chair?
So at one stage, there were some clear projects under what I read as the Healthy Waterways Action. Okay. And I'm just wondering where they fit with this. And sorry, Johannes, you probably weren't here. Maybe some other staff can clarify that, because I guess it's sort of a high level question.
Can I ask Tim perhaps too, because he might have had the benefit of a little bit of a forewarning.
Well, perhaps for your sake, Johannes, I think Councillor Clearwater is referring to the urban streams, the healthy waterways work streams that have been done in conjunction with Christchurch City Council through the waterways agreement, the urban water partnership and some of those things. So.
Okay. Pretty much most projects that we are delivering across Central fit into the Healthy Urban Waterway work program. In Christchurch specifically, the work is aligned and quite often in partnership with the City Council and reported back to the partnership thing. So that is all aligned. So we're creating a visibility across both organisations, and we've extended that on a voluntary basis with Selwyn as well. So we actually create a bit of alignment because we have waterways, for example, the Huritini Halswell, that crosses two water catchments or two water zones.
Thank you for that. And my other question is in relation to the projects that are listed on page 91 for the Central Zone. And like, just prefacing this with a comment, that, for example, I think an excellent program has been the Sticks Living Laboratory Trust, and there's a note there, $4 million has been obtained to develop their work. That's terrific. What I'm just wondering too, though, is it just seemed to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, that some of the reports perhaps don't indicate and indicate how far we have yet to go to achieve, I guess, the objectives, and I guess the Kashmir stream restoration is an example. So although, for example, it's continuing, it might be reducing erosion and improving sediment control. I'm just wondering if you might comment on just how far we have, or how much we've yet to achieve with those sort of programs.
I guess the first part is how long is a piece of string? And we're dealing with 200 years of land use changes and waterway changes. How far do we have to go? Probably still a wee way, but in saying this, we've achieved a hell of a lot across Christchurch. When I just look at the behaviour change, when we see how neighbours are now picking up, if I can refer back to Selwyn, where we started with a single landowner, and all of a sudden the whole catchment wants to do the same, and we don't have to support them anymore. They just want to know where to get the plants and how to do it best. So if I look at that, I think we've come a really, really long way, where people pull back fences, where people proactively engage. We don't even have to tell them. They come to us and say, can you have a look at it, and almost give me a little reward around how well I've done and how can I inspire others. I think in that space we've done really well. You've heard earlier some of the LAWA data on waterways. There's always a lot to do, and that's why we keep on going. But the crucial piece from my point of view is we've got a lot of the community on our side. They want to do things with us rather than do their own thing. They want to be left to their own devices once they've figured out what they want to do. And that's probably where we sit, is enabling them and then just do it in their own time and their own way.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yes, may I ask one more question? So, thank you. I guess when it comes to, for example, the restoration of the stream, one ongoing challenge, of course, is the way that the Christchurch City Plan allows development right up into the Port Hills. And so, would it, in terms of actually having that that issue addressed, that the city plan, would our urban water partnership, would that be a good sort of channel, excuse the pun, for that matter to be progressed?
I would say,
Sorry.
it's all good. I would say neither organisation is not trying to do their best in that space. But looking at the Port Hills and some of the development that's going on, we're dealing with highly erosive hillsides. Even the untouched, naturally regenerating bush areas have some major sediment hotspots, underrunners, etc., where we're struggling to even do something about, because we're talking about whole hillsides and whole gullies and valleys. Our best approach so far has been working with CC on what are the priority catchments, what are those hotspots, where could we use some of those sediment traps to catch the sediment before it hits some of the amazing stormwater retention basins to actually filter that out. That's a work in progress, because we're working really closely with the parks team, especially on the Port Hills, to drive and increase the area of vegetation cover, because that's one of the best solutions to that issue. But when you're dealing with a naturally occurring sediment releasing type of soil on a really exposed to all 5-6 seasons that we have, it's just a real big challenge.
Okay.
Thanks, Johannes, but I guess we are still talking about mitigation rather than prevention, but thank you for explaining that.
Councillor Southworth.
Thank you. Yeah, on the sediment topic as well, I'm just, that's quite a common issue across a number of these catchments. And I was just wondering whether the sort of lessons that we've learned about how effective getting community engagement to address issues from like the Bromley's Melted app and so on, whether there's an opportunity, because sediment, unlike many of our other pollutants, is actually really visible. And so is there work happening? Is there an intention to try to really gear things up to get members of the public driving visibility of this issue to really just raise awareness and start tackling that? I don't sense that level scale of action and communication is happening. And obviously over many years we've had it's really recognised in rural space how important it is. We've had that 5-hand, a lot of promotion and helping. I don't see in the work, in this description, something that's really quite on that same scale. And bearing in mind, we're talking about, a population in this city alone, 350,000 people. It's a whole another scale of magnitude again from what we maybe have seen with other issues across the region.
Good point. The way this paper's been put together was focusing on the community engagement, biodiversity, land management component. It wasn't necessarily focused on water quality in relation to sediment erosion. The underlying theme right through this is stopping things from getting into the water or improving the water habitat in itself. And so one of the outcomes is reduced sediment erosion. Sediment erosion focus programs would typically pop up in an update you'd receive. I don't know which committee it is around compliance. So we do have, for example, the rainy day inventory, which we've been piloting and increasing over the past 2 years, and the Kashmir Stream Care Working Group, the subcommittee of the Christchurch Zone Committee, has been really good at supporting us of how do we tailor this to actually reach communities. And we've got a growing number of communities along the Port Hills. It's always difficult if people don't want to listen or people don't want to own it, because there's only so much we can do from a monetary compliance space, especially when it's natural sources. But it is increasing, especially in Christchurch. But it's also something, if the community is not interested, it's really hard to get that groundswell. And that's when we're coming in more from a regulatory point of view.
Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, and we need a break before the next committee meeting, I will move on from points of clarity and put the motion on the table that the Natural Environment Committee notes the report Kia to Katai on plains, lowland streams and urban waterways cross-portfolio work program overview. Thank you, Johannes and Anita, for your presentations here around and providing clarity around this paper. I'll just now open it up for points of discussion. And I would just like to perhaps just go back to the comment that Councillor Mackenzie made there around the projects and people working together, and the more that people can work together, you can actually perhaps not have unintended consequences, or at least consider what may possibly be the consequences of some of the actions. But I just want to also note that while you've put a lot of key projects in here, there are a lot of projects that are going on with Environment Canterbury as a primary contributor, or as an essential contributor in dollars or in kind, as you've raised, that are improving the health of our waterways on the plains. So just making sure that people are aware that this is not the sole number of them, but there are a lot of projects there. So does anybody else have anything while we're in discussion before we move this motion? Then being not, could I have a mover for that motion, please? Councillor Scott, a seconder. Councillor Clearwater. All in favour say aye. Against? Nothing against. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, well, moving right along to agenda item 7, which is notice of motions. There are no notices of motion. I've been advised of. Extraordinary business and urgent business, there has been none. Nope. The next meeting will be confirmed. I think that'll be in the council papers, the date soon. So that will be confirmed, and it'll be obviously held in early 2022. And we will hold over the closing karakia until the next committee closes off. So look, I want to thank everybody in the room, everybody who's online, and everybody else who's been involved and gone for their participation in the Natural Environment Committee today.
Madam Chair, can I just say, in terms of transport UDC, there's no run through, and we'll start about 1:45. Right.